I thought transmigrating into another world was just a delusion, right up until the moment I fell unconscious while cosplaying a demon at a convention. When I opened my eyes, I found myself trapped in a cold, stifling newborn body. I could barely breathe, and my heart beat with a terrifying fragility. Hearing the midwife declare me a stillborn, my survival instincts kicked in alongside the cold, detached mind of a demon race creature. Driven by a pure urge to exist, I took my first breath and let out a faint cry. The people in the room gasped in terror, calling me a resurrected monster and naming me Ubuyashiki Tsukihiko. I recognized that name immediately. In this world, I was born as the sickly child destined to become the Demon King. My body was extremely weak, making every breath a painful struggle. Having been a healthy person with a happy family in my modern life, I felt intense frustration over my fragile state. Yet, as time went on, my human emotions began to freeze over. The cold, logical mindset of the demon race took over my thought process. I started manipulating the people around me using precise words and expressions. Complaining about the cold or the bitterness of my medicine was no longer an emotional reaction, but a deliberate tactic to extract warmth, sweet treats, and better resources from the servants and my distant father. While the servants praised me for being sensible and precocious, the remnant of my human soul felt a deep sorrow, knowing that my mild demeanor was just a calculated lie to ensure my survival. By the time I turned 16, my life remained a monotonous cycle of illness and medication. That was when my father brought a renowned physician to the mansion. The doctor was convinced he could cure me and offered a bowl of dark, foul-smelling medicine. Knowing the lore of this world, my inner alarm bells rang. I knew that drinking the wrong experimental elixir would turn me into a monster that craves human blood, something my modern morality could never accept. I weakly refused the potion, telling him to leave my fate alone. However, the doctor grew stubborn and tried to force the bowl into my mouth. Terrified of a future where I would become a bloodthirsty creature, I summoned all the strength I had and struck his hand. The porcelain bowl shattered against the floor, spilling the dark liquid across the room like an ominous sign. After I rejected the medicine, the old physician didn't force the issue immediately, but I could see a fanatical obsession in his eyes. As time went on, my health rapidly deteriorated. I was coughing up blood and falling into long periods of unconsciousness. During one deep sleep, I woke up with an overwhelming bitterness in my mouth. Taking advantage of my weak state, the old man had secretly fed me his experimental potion. Over the following months, he repeatedly gave me the medication while I was unconscious. Surprisingly, my condition actually stabilized. The frequent coughing stopped, and my father rewarded the doctor generously. However, I was the only one who knew the true price. I developed a strong aversion to sunlight, while my senses sharpened at night, allowing me to hear distant whispers and smell the warm scent of human blood beneath skin. Eventually, the physician offered me what he claimed was the final bowl of medicine, meant to cure the aversion to sunlight. Realizing there was no turning back, I drank it and felt subtle changes within my body. The old doctor proudly announced his plans to travel the world and distribute this potion to cure all illnesses. Looking out the window, I noticed a servant boy pruning branches, and I felt a strange urge as I watched his pulsing carotid artery. I asked the doctor if he really intended to spread this medicine, warning him that it had severe side effects. He eagerly tried to check my pulse, but I stepped back. When he brushed off my desire to eat meat as a sign of recovery, I calmly clarified that I was not talking about animal meat. Standing deep in the shadows with glowing red eyes, I looked him in the face and told him I meant human flesh. The old physician froze, staggered backward in terror, and began muttering in utter disbelief as he realized the horrifying monster he had created. I walked through the courtyard, taking firm and effortless steps. Breathing no longer caused me excruciating pain, and my heart beat steadily within my chest. My body had become amazingly healthy. Living in Heian-kyo was incredibly boring without modern technology or entertainment, but my demonic mindset helped filter out anxiety and allowed me to focus on survival. I realized that despite these cold logic systems, I still possessed human emotions like irritation, joy, and relief. I understood concepts of malice and guilt, which gave me immense comfort. I wasn't completely turned into a monster. My core moral framework was still intact. I decided I would simply accept whatever came my way, keeping my moral principles while enjoying this strong, healthy body, rather than bringing myself to commit suicide. As I walked back to my room, I spotted the old physician being accosted by a desperate father. The man was weeping on his knees, begging the doctor to save his dying son. The doctor looked flustered and strained, trying to refuse by claiming the medicine had dangerous side effects. When they noticed me, the old doctor quickly averted his eyes in fear, clearly terrified that I might eat him after my previous declaration. I gave them a polite nod and kept walking, knowing that medical decisions belong solely between the doctor and his patient. Behind me, the doctor watched my calm behavior and made a decision. Believing that my rational state meant the drug's violent side effects could be mitigated by lowering the dosage, his eyes reignited with fanatic determination. He told the weeping father he would prepare a diluted version of the medicine, convinced he could still save lives without turning people into monsters. Several months passed while I spent my days reading classic Heian-kyo texts to pass the endless hours. During this time, I constantly felt a deep hunger, but my modern standards of cleanliness suppressed any urge to cannibalize ancient people. One night, my heightened sense of smell picked up a decaying scent of blood mixed with a familiar herbal odor. Outside my room, I found the old doctor crawling across the cobblestones, covered in fatal lacerations. He explained through broken breaths that he had given a diluted version of the potion to the dying boy from before. Although the child recovered, he developed an uncontrollable craving for raw meat. Losing control, the boy attacked his family and accidentally killed his sister. Devastated and furious, the boy wounded the doctor before fleeing. Knowing his wounds were fatal, the old doctor dragged his dying body to my courtyard to apologize for turning us into monsters. He marveled at how I could maintain a calm exterior after taking the full dosage, assuming I possessed incredible willpower. I tried to comfort the dying man by explaining that I was grateful because his medicine had cured my terminal illness and given me a chance to live. However, my calm and logical response only horrified him further. The doctor realized in terror that I wasn't using willpower to suppress human pain or anger, but rather that my human emotional responses had completely vanished. Filled with intense shock, grief, and fear over what he had created, the doctor took his final breath and died with his eyes wide open. Watching his corpse, I silently concluded that I needed to work on my social skills. Outside my courtyard, night guards discovered the old doctor's body and immediately fell to their knees in terror. Fearing severe punishment for failing to protect the mansion, they pleaded for mercy. I calmly told them it was not their fault and instructed them to bury the doctor under the ancient tree in my yard. The guards were horrified by the idea of burying a corpse directly inside a private residence, but they dared not disobey my orders. Because the physician had cured me, I viewed him as a benefactor who deserved to be buried nearby. While the guards worked in terrifying silence, others repeatedly scrubbed the bloodstains off the cobblestone path using cold well water, creating a faint fishy smell that drifted through the air. Returning to my room, I tried to read Heian-kyo classics to pass the time. I pondered the future, realizing my unchanging appearance would eventually raise suspicions as everyone else aged. I planned to fake my death in 10 or 20 years and live quietly in the mountains, taking advantage of my endless lifespan. I also spent time experimenting with my body's abilities, discovering I could shapeshift. While creating an entirely fake face was difficult because it required precise imagination, modifying my existing physical form was easy. I successfully transformed my body into a delicate woman's form and then reduced my size to resemble a child. After confirming I could alter my appearance at will, I changed back into my original form as Ubuyashiki Tsukihiko to await the start of a new day. Lately, terrifying rumors floated through the mansion about people being brutally bitten and eaten alive at night. Hearing these stories, I initially worried that I might have sleepwalked and attacked people. However, looking at my clean hands, I realized the true culprit was the boy who took the diluted medicine. He had killed his family, injured the doctor, and fled into the night. Because he never received the crucial final dose of medicine containing the blue spider lily, he was an incomplete ghost who was vulnerable to sunlight. Suddenly, I realized that he might come after me. As the only person who completed the full treatment and conquered the sun, I was his only cure to achieve perfection. For a brief moment, I felt uneasy thinking about being hunted. But looking at myself in the mirror, I remembered who I was. I was Ubuyashiki Tsukihiko, the complete demon king. In this era, 500 years before Yoriichi Sugekuni would be born, no one could threaten me. I held absolute power, immunity to sunlight, and knowledge of the future. The incomplete monster was no match for me. However, as my cold confidence settled, a wave of self-reflection washed over me. I realized how arrogant and self-centered my thinking had become. I had only considered my own safety, completely ignoring the danger that an attack on the mansion would bring to my family and the innocent servants. Before my transmigration, I always cared about how my actions affected others. Becoming a demon had made my mind ruthlessly self-focused. Panic set in as I questioned whether I was losing my human empathy. To prove to myself that I still possessed a human soul that cared for innocent lives, I made a firm decision. I would leave the family and run away from home to draw any potential danger away from the mansion. To leave my family without raising suspicion, I staged an ambush using hired vagrants to destroy my ox cart and fake my disappearance. Afterwards, I traveled to a remote mountain village and assumed a new identity as a sickly, terminally ill doctor from a fallen noble family. I used my modern knowledge and basic medical skills to treat the villagers, gaining their respect, sympathy, and trust. Playing the role of a dying doctor while secretly possessing a powerful, disease-free demon body helped me anchor my fading humanity. Living among the villagers and helping them provided a fragile balance between my cold, inhuman core and my human moral principles. One evening, after returning from collecting herbs in the mountains, I was met with the overwhelming stench of blood. Reaching the village, I found a scene of total devastation. Every single villager had been brutally slaughtered and partially devoured. Standing in the center of the slaughter was a twisted, bluish-gray monster. The boy who had taken the diluted potion. The boy turned to face me, driven entirely by bloodlust and hunger. He blamed the dead physician for destroying his life and demanded to know the final prescription that would allow him to overcome the sun, threatening to absorb me if I refused to cooperate. Without engaging in his rant, I asked why he had slaughtered the innocent villagers when his enemy, the doctor, was already dead. He mocked my morality and insisted that as a monster, I must also crave human flesh. Before he could react, my instincts kicked in. I unleashed black whips from my body with incredible speed. Though the boy managed to dodge slightly at the last second, one of my whips cleanly severed his left arm at the shoulder. As he stumbled back in shock and horror, I calmly stood my ground, realizing that while his reflexes were decent, my attack had been intended to slice him completely in half. After breaking the rogue demon's legs, I dragged him to an open area directly under the sky and kept him trapped using my whips, holding an umbrella to shield myself from the slight discomfort of direct sunlight. I watched as the dawn arrived. The moment the golden rays touched the monster, his flesh began to burn and disintegrate. In a matter of moments, his wails faded and he turned into a pile of dark ashes. With the monster gone, I buried every single slaughtered villager back in the dirt to let them rest in peace. Once finished, I left the ruined village behind and retreated deep into the quiet mountains. Over the passing years, I lived a peaceful, isolated life. I spent my time wandering through forests, listening to streams, and occasionally helping lost travelers find their way. One day, a talking Kasugai crow landed near my usual resting spot. The bird bowed politely and delivered a message from the current head of the Ubuyashiki family. It explained that the Ubuyashiki head had uncovered ancient records mentioning my existence. Because the Demon Slayer Corps had been fighting demons for over a century, the head respectfully requested a peaceful meeting to ask questions about the origin and nature of demons. The crow's message left me deeply confused and disturbed. Since I had personally destroyed the only other existing demon, I couldn't understand how ghosts were still spreading across the world, or why the Demon Slayer Corps had formed. I wondered if my mere existence had somehow cursed my bloodline, or triggered a rule in this world that generated more demons automatically. Realizing I needed to uncover the truth behind these anomalies, I agreed to the request and told the crow to set the time and place for our meeting. Following Kasugai Crow's directions, I entered a deserted mansion in a small town. The area had been completely evacuated beforehand, showing how seriously my host took this meeting. Inside a dimly lit room, a frail 16-year-old youth dressed in a white houris sat waiting for me alone, without any guards or servants nearby. He introduced himself as Kagaya Ubuyashiki. I sat down opposite him on a futon and greeted him politely. My modern manners completely caught Kagaya off guard, confusing both him and the crow perched on his shoulder. After adjusting to my unexpectedly polite demeanor, Kagaya explained that he was willing to lay out all his information transparently to build trust. Since I hadn't spoken with anyone in a very long time, I tried to break the ice with mundane small talk, asking if he had eaten and how his meal was. Kagaya was thoroughly baffled by my questions, wondering if I was probing him about human food versus a demon's desire for flesh. He carefully answered that he had eaten light kanji due to his poor health. When I casually asked what he wanted to discuss, Kagaya looked completely bewildered once again. He had prepared intense arguments and strategies for this encounter, only to feel like he was punching thin air. Furthermore, I realized I didn't have many questions left for him either. If my existence truly cursed my bloodline and caused suffering, I was willing to accept going to heaven, though I knew the other wild demons roaming the world were not my doing. Quickly recovering his composure, Kagaya asked if I remembered someone named Ubuyashiki Takaya. As I searched through my distant memories for the name, I couldn't help but notice how both Kagaya and his crow tilted their heads in unison. Watching the bird mimic its master's cautious demeanor, I found myself distracted by how much the pet had come to resemble its owner. When Kagaya Ubuyashiki asked if I remembered a demon named Ubuyashiki Takaya, I genuinely couldn't recall the name at first. Kagaya was astonished that I had no memory of the other original demon, born at the same time as me. After searching my distant memories, I finally realized who Takaya was. I told Kagaya that I remembered burning that guy to ash under the sun after he slaughtered a village, and I was shocked to learn he was still alive. Kagaya was stunned by this revelation, realizing that two powerful original demons had actually fought each other, though no demons in their records ever possessed my bloodline. Kagaya anxiously asked if Takaya had somehow overcome the sun. I reassured him that I stayed until the monster turned completely into ash. However, as Kagaya pressed for details, I remembered one small missing piece. During our fight, I had severed Takaya's arm, and that severed limb was the only part I hadn't personally watched disintegrate in the sunlight. Kagaya murmured in realization that a demon could apparently regenerate and survive from a single remaining limb. When Kagaya asked what caused our fight, the sky outside began to brighten. Realizing the sun was rising, Kagaya quickly assured me that I could safely stay in the courtyard until nightfall, since he had evacuated the entire area. I calmly told him it didn't matter even if it was an ambush, adding that if the Demon Slayer Corps truly felt my existence was an unbearable threat, they could simply eliminate me. Once again, Kagaya was left completely bewildered by my passive, non-threatening attitude. Returning to his earlier question, I explained that I attacked Takaya simply because the monster had suddenly popped up out of nowhere and disrupted my peaceful life. During the daytime, I wandered through the silent, empty mansion. Realizing that there was no food or supplies anywhere, I deduced that Kagaya Ubuyashiki had come to this meeting, expecting to die, willing to sacrifice himself to gather information about demons. Sitting in the shadow of the eaves, I passed the time by catching insects. When Kasugai Crow approached, I coaxed it with a bug and petted its soft feathers. Suddenly, violent coughing echoed from the living room. The crow panicked and immediately flew to its master's side. As the coughing persisted for hours, I went to check on Kagaya. Worried that his death in my presence would falsely frame me for his murder, I pushed open the door. Kagaya was collapsed over his desk, trembling violently and unable to stop coughing, while his crow tried in vain to comfort him. Using my whips, I quickly crafted a wooden umbrella to shield myself from the sun's glare, then headed into the nearby mountains to collect medicinal herbs to alleviate his symptoms. After collecting medicinal herbs in the mountains, I returned to the mansion and gave Kagaya Ubuyashiki a few bitter leaves to chew. The cool juice helped suppress the irritation in his throat. I also handed him a large raw radish to eat. Sitting beside him on the cold floor, I enjoyed the warmth radiating from his feverish body. Kagaya ate small, weak bites of the radish, softly recalling how he used to dig up wild roots with his brothers when he was little. When I asked about his age and family, he revealed he was only 14 years old. He shared that his father died of illness. His mother took her own life out of grief, and his eldest brother ended his own life while taking their middle brother along. This left a frail, blind 14-year-old boy alone to carry the heavy burden of the Ubuyashiki family and lead the Demon Slayer Corps. I pointed out the cruel reality of his struggle. In this era, before Yoriichi's birth and without breathing styles, human swordsmen faced demons with only their physical bodies and blades. While demons could regenerate limbs and grow stronger by eating humans, lost human limbs never grew back. Every victory required massive sacrifices in a war that seemed impossible to win. Despite these overwhelming odds, Kagaya responded with calm, unwavering conviction. He explained that doing what is right does not become wrong simply because it is difficult or hopeless. As long as demons devoured humans and innocent people suffered, the Ubuyashiki family would respond to the desire to protect others. When I reminded him that neither he nor his immediate successors would live to see the end of this war, Kagaya smiled serenely. He told me that, even if they were merely pebbles, paving the road for future generations who would finally end the threat, that purpose alone gave meaning to every breath he took and every sacrifice his family made. I sincerely apologized to Kagaya Ubuyashiki. Though my demon mindset could no longer truly feel or comprehend his self-sacrificing principles, my past human knowledge taught me that his selfless righteousness deserved respect. Listening quietly, Kagaya gently noted that while I understood his words intellectually, I no longer felt them. Feeling profound sorrow for me, he took my hand in his feverish palm and asked if becoming a demon had stripped away my core human nature. He then gently insisted that I must have been a very kind person when I was alive. I admitted that over centuries, many things that used to bring me joy or make sense now felt distant and incomprehensible, as if my emotions were blocked behind frosted glass. Kagaya gently tapped my forehead and urged me to travel through the world to observe life, nature, and everyday human warmth, assuring me that my feelings were not gone, only hidden too deep. Touched by his wisdom, I praised his maturity and agreed to go look for those lost feelings. When sunset arrived, I decided to stay through the dark night instead of leaving him alone. Remembering how I used to fear the dark as a child, I offered to let him hold my sleeve. Kagaya smiled gently and held onto my sleeve, lightly resting his shoulder against my arm. As we sat in the quiet darkness, he reminisced about his childhood, fondly remembering how he used to hold his father's arm when scared of ghost stories, comforted by his mother and brothers. Before I departed, Kagaya Ubuyashiki and I silently understood that we could not form an official alliance. He remained the resolute leader of the Demon Slayer Corps, while I was an unpredictable non-human entity. On the evening of the second day, I decided to leave. Before taking my leave, I broke off my little finger and reshaped the bone into a small, smooth whistle. Handing it to Kagaya, I told him he could blow it if he ever found himself in a desperate situation. Though the choice to keep or discard it was entirely his. Kagaya accepted the parting gift with sincere gratitude. Following Kagaya's advice, I embarked on a journey to find my lost human feelings. Traveling through ancient towns and villages, I observed ordinary people struggling through life. Most were exhausted by heavy labor, poverty, taxes, and fear. While I occasionally encountered small acts of kindness, such as an old woman offering a rice ball, these brief moments failed to rekindle any warmth within my cold core. I began to wonder if the rich, meaningful emotional life Kagaya described was merely a rare illusion in a harsh, barren world. As my long journey continued, I eventually arrived at a quiet town as the sun began to set. Smelling a clean, herbal scent from a tidy residence on the outskirts, I knocked on the courtyard gate. A frail, sickly young woman dressed in a plain kimono named Tamayo opened the door. Before she could speak, her husband hurried out, gently scolding her for getting out of bed and encouraging her to rest with their child. After tenderly guiding his wife back inside, the husband returned to the gate. I explained that I was a traveler needing a place to stay for the night. Though worried about his sick wife, the kind husband agreed to let me sleep in his clean woodshed. I thanked him and settled into the room as he returned to care for his family. At dawn, I heard grinding sounds and suppressed coughs coming from the main house. Looking through a crack in the door, I saw Tamayo grinding herbs on the porch while her husband stood by, asking in heartache why she was exhausting herself to make medicine for others when she was so sick. Tamayo calmly explained that since her illness was incurable, she hoped alleviating others' suffering and performing good deeds might move the gods or at least bring good fortune to their child. Moved by her resolve, her husband wiped his face and set off to work, leaving Tamayo and me in the courtyard. Opening my oil paper umbrella to shield myself from the light, I stepped out of the woodshed. Seeing me, Tamayo's immediate reaction was that of a caring healer. Noting my pale complexion, she gently offered to examine me despite her own failing health. I declined, explaining I was merely naturally weak and sensitive to light, but thanked her for taking me in. As I prepared to leave, I noticed her sunken eyes and asked about her condition, mentioning my own background in medicine. Tamayo offered a faint, bitter smile, admitting she suffered from a terminal illness that slowly drained her from the inside out and that all her remedies had failed. Before we could speak further, the urgent crying of a baby interrupted us. Instantly driven by maternal instinct, Tamayo put down her mortar and hurried inside. I walked to the doorway and watched as she gathered her crying child into her arms. Pressing her cheek against the baby's face, she softly hummed a lullaby and rocked the child gently until the crying subsided into soft humming. After her baby fell back asleep, Tamayo stepped out of the room and sat exhausted against the doorframe. I sat down next to her under the shadow of my umbrella and mentioned that her child was adorable. This prompted Tamayo to share cherished memories of her husband and child. As she spoke of these happy moments, she suddenly began to weep uncontrollably. Confused by her reaction, I asked why she was crying if her memories were so wonderful. Tamayo explained through her tears that having such immense happiness made the prospect of losing her family to terminal illness unbearable. She confessed that she had not truly accepted everything with detachment, but was simply forced to endure the heartbreaking reality. I admitted my inability to understand her logic. I asked how she could feel intense love for her child while simultaneously regretting bringing him into the world. Tamayo gently explained that accepting an outcome does not stop the pain from hurting. She felt deeply guilty for giving her child life only to abandon him so early, leaving him to experience the bitterness of loss. Her broken words helped me identify the exact emotion driving her torment: guilt. It was a complex blend of love, sorrow, and self-blame. At that moment, I realized the fundamental difference between humans and demons. While I could logically analyze and name her complex emotions, I remained entirely incapable of actually feeling them within myself. My heart remained still, unmoved by her tears and untouched by her love. I had finally found the human emotion I was searching for, only to realize that my ability to truly experience it was gone forever. Tamayo was the first human to vividly display the feeling of guilt that I could analyze but never truly experience. Hoping she might teach me what I was missing, I asked if she would accept any cost, if there were a way for her to remain with her husband and child. I clearly laid out the cruel consequences of this choice. I warned her that she would never walk in the sunlight again, and worse, she would likely lose her rationality, degenerate into a bloodthirsty beast, and potentially harm or devour the very family she loved. Tamayo looked into the room at her sleeping child, locked in an agonizing internal battle between her fear of turning into a monster and her overwhelming desire to stay with her family. Ultimately, her maternal love won out. With a hoarse and resolute voice, she agreed to pay the price, admitting that she was willing to embrace this crime just to spend one more day watching over her child. Respecting her choice, I extended a bone whip from my body and pierced her neck, injecting a small, carefully measured amount of my demon blood into her body. It was my first time turning someone into a demon, so I kept the dosage minimal to prevent her body from exploding. As the bone whip retracted, Tamayo collapsed to the floor in extreme agony, her body convulsing as the transformation began. Black veins bulged beneath her pale skin, while her human life force mutated with my blood. In her final moments of human consciousness, as she fought against the searing pain, Tamayo looked up at me with tears in her eyes and made one final desperate plea. If she lost control and attempted to harm her family, I must kill her. After promising Tamayo that I would kill her if she lost control, her remaining consciousness slipped away, and she fell into a deep coma. I carried her back to the woodshed, where her neck wound healed cleanly under the power of my demon blood. When her husband returned home exhausted, he panicked upon finding his wife unconscious. I calmly lied to him, claiming she had suddenly fallen ill with a severe, highly contagious disease. I added that before losing consciousness, Tamayo had specifically warned that he and their baby must keep their distance. Heartbroken and helpless, the foolish man believed every word I said and reluctantly stayed away to protect their child. The next morning, the husband approached me in extreme distress. Driven by the need to earn a living at the local rice shop, he could not afford to miss work. Yet he had no one to care for his crying baby while his wife was isolated. Seeing his desperation, I offered to look after the child as well. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he thanked me profusely and rushed off to his job. As soon as he left, Tamayo awoke inside the woodshed. Her human gentleness was completely gone, replaced by a feral beast with bared fangs, bulging veins, and slit pupils. Driven by intense bloodlust, she locked her predatory gaze onto the baby in the main house. However, before she could move, I exerted absolute bloodline authority over her, locking her in place with a single cold thought. Trapped by invisible chains, she could only hiss in frustration, unable to step out of the shadows. Leaving the restless, newly turned demon suppressed in the woodshed, I went into the main house to care for the crying infant. Mimicking human behavior, I picked him up, cooked a fresh batch of rice porridge, and carefully fed the child until he finally grew quiet and stared up at me with big, dark eyes. Tamayo was consumed by a deep, bone-gnawing hunger that stripped away her reason and memory. Having experienced that overwhelming craving for human flesh myself, I knew how difficult it was to suppress. Looking at her crying baby in my arms, I decided to test if the bond between mother and child could awaken her lost humanity. Carrying the infant to the woodshed, I opened the door. Smelling fresh blood, Tamayo bared her sharp fangs like a mountain beast. But when the baby burst into tears, her growls abruptly stopped. The bloodlust in her eyes faded into confusion, and looking at her sharp claws and crying child, tears welled up in her eyes. She managed to squeeze out the word child before retreating into the dark corner, curling up into a quiet ball. Though she lacked memories, her maternal instinct kept her from attacking. When her husband returned home, I prepared to make up excuses, but his simple mind accepted her changed state without suspicion, believing it was just a strange side effect of her medical treatment. Despite her ghostly appearance and sharp claws, he remained entirely devoted to her. Every night, he sat in the woodshed, talking to her about their past, recalling the day they met, their spring walks, and her pregnancy cravings. Even when Tamayo accidentally scratched him in her confused state, he never backed away, continuously surrounding her with warmth and love. Day after day, through her husband's gentle persistence and her baby's clear babbling, a true miracle occurred. One morning, Tamayo did not hide in the dark corner. She raised her hand and tenderly touched the scabbed wounds on her husband's face, shedding a clear tear. With a soft, hoarse voice, she finally greeted him with a human, "Good morning," as her humanity fully broke through the darkness of her demon instincts. I observed Tamayo's family for a long time, until her child began taking his first unsteady steps. Realizing I still hadn't found the emotional answer I was searching for, I decided it was time to say goodbye. When Tamayo asked what and who I was so persistently looking for, I instinctively answered with the surname Ubuyashiki. However, when I tried to say his full name, my mind went completely blank. Over time, I had forgotten the name of the child who guided me. Seeing my blank confusion, Tamayo began to weep with profound sorrow. She insisted that despite my cold exterior, a deep gentleness remained within me. She felt sad because I had forgotten how gentle I used to be, pointing out that my empty grief for Ubuyashiki proved I was still mourning him. I was genuinely perplexed by her words. I asked how she could be so sure I was grieving when I felt no physical pain in my chest and shed no tears. Tamayo gently explained that, just as her own soul remembered her family before her mind regained its memories, my persistent search and illogical confusion proved my sorrow. She placed her hand over mine against my chest and told me that this very emptiness was the deepest form of grief. For a brief second, my heart fluttered, but the feeling disappeared almost instantly, returning my pulse to its steady, cold rhythm. I honestly admitted to her that whatever spark had flared up was already gone. Tamayo closed her eyes and made a solemn vow. She declared that after her husband grew old and her child grew up, she would repay my kindness by helping me on my journey. I didn't explicitly accept her offer. Looking out at the bright sunlight where her family played, I silently knew that once her loved ones eventually aged and passed away, she would likely choose to follow them into death, rather than remain alone in the dark forever. Taking Tamayo's advice to experience human connections directly rather than remaining a mere observer, I wandered for over 60 years before arriving in a large town. I disguised myself as a 7-year-old orphan and staged an encounter with a wealthy, childless couple. Pitying my state, the husband adopted me, giving me the surname Kibutsuji and the name Kibutsuji Muzan. The strange persistence of this surname made me feel a sense of melancholy, realizing how tightly locked this world was in its predetermined script. Still, I accepted my role, viewing my search for human bonds simply as a way to find my path home. For years, I lived comfortably as their son, receiving an education and offering daily respects to my adoptive mother. However, when I turned 12, my adoptive father took me to visit the prominent Sugikuni clan, a renowned samurai family. As our carriage stopped before their vermilion gates, a sudden, instinctual warning flared within my body at the mere mention of their name. Inside the guest room, my father introduced me to two identical teenage brothers sitting opposite us. The brother on the left, proud and sharp, was Tsugikuni Michikatsu. Sitting on the right, with serene red eyes and deep red flame marks across his left temple, was Sugikuni Yoriichi. The moment Yoriichi and I locked eyes, an invisible tension snapped between us. Every drop of my demon blood screamed in primal terror, instinctively reacting to the godlike heat in his gaze. Yoriichi froze as well, his calm aura shifting instantly into extreme alertness. Though he did not yet understand why, a deep, physiological hostility etched into the very essence of our existences was instantly awakened in that single glance. In the main hall, the heads of the Kibutsuji and Sugikuni families chatted pleasantly. Meanwhile, Sugikuni Yoriichi and I stood across a low table, locked in an intense, silent standoff that far exceeded mere childhood curiosity. Noticing our mutual fixated gazes, my adoptive father expressed concern over my frail health. Seeing an opportunity, he suggested I stay at the Sugikuni residence for a while to absorb their martial spirit and Yoriichi's vitality. The head of the Sugikuni family happily agreed. After my adoptive father departed, the two red-haired brothers showed me around the estate. Standing beneath my oil paper umbrella to block the sunlight, I walked alongside them in an eerie silence. Ahead walked Michikatsu, while Yoriichi followed behind, his intense gaze piercing right through me. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. This was not fear, but a thrilling, instinctual resonance between natural enemies, an inevitable clash between light and darkness. When I retreated into my guest room, Yoriichi remained standing outside the door, staring intently at my room. Michikatsu questioned his younger brother about his abnormal behavior toward a sickly stranger. Yoriichi simply shook his head and offered no explanation. Filled with jealousy and frustration over Yoriichi's godlike talent and mysterious behavior, Michikatsu urged his brother to leave, and the two walked away together. Leaning against the closed door, I listened to their receding footsteps as my surging blood slowly cooled down. Suddenly, a strange discrepancy occurred to me. In the original story, Yoriichi was supposed to have run away from home at the age of 8. However, looking at my 12-year-old disguised body, I realized Yoriichi and Michikatsu were the exact same age as me. It became clear that Yoriichi never left home as a child, revealing that the history of this world had already shifted off its original track. In the courtyard, Sugekuni Michikatsu swung his wooden sword with desperate intensity, pouring all his resentment into every strike. He watched his younger brother, Sugekuni Yoriichi, who possessed divine martial talent, yet preferred to sit idly in a corner poking at a snail. To Michikatsu's bitter frustration, his strict swordsmanship instructor bowed humbly before Yoriichi, practically begging him to demonstrate just a single sword stroke. Michikatsu felt a burning jealousy, unable to understand why heaven had bestowed ultimate talent upon a brother who did not even desire it, while ignoring his own relentless hard work. Exhausted and trembling, Michikatsu lowered his sword and caught sight of me sitting quietly in the shade under the eaves. Feeling deeply embarrassed that an outside guest had witnessed his desperate, envious struggle, Michikatsu quickly wiped his sweat, straightened his clothes, and walked over to greet me calmly as the proud heir of the Tsugekuni clan. Before we could converse, Yoriichi silently followed and sat down beside me as well. Positioned between the two brothers on the veranda, the atmosphere grew intensely subtle. Trying to act as a proper host, Michikatsu prepared to speak, but Yoriichi beat him to it. Staring directly into my eyes, Yoriichi asked me bluntly and rudely, "What are you?" Michikatsu gasped in horror at his brother's offensive question and prepared to apologize on his behalf. However, I remained completely unbothered. Looking back at Yoriichi with a calm and serious expression, I simply replied, "I am not a thing." Both brothers froze in a suffocating silence at my strange response. Fortunately, a maidservant arrived shortly after to report that their mother requested Yoriichi's presence. Yoriichi immediately stood up, bowed to Michikatsu, gave me one last inquisitive look, and departed. With Yoriichi gone, the tense air cleared. Michikatsu let out a quiet sigh of relief and turned to me, attempting to regain his aristocratic composure as he apologized for his brother's unexpected words. I told Sugekuni Michikatsu that Yoriichi's strange question didn't bother me. Seeing Yoriichi's ability to perceive the true nature of things, he likely recognized that my demon body differed from an ordinary human's. Turning to Michikatsu, I sincerely praised his dedicated swordsmanship. My compliment visibly stunned him, momentarily smoothing over his deep-seated insecurities. However, Michikatsu quickly relapsed into self-doubt, mumbling that his father considered him weak. Accustomed to courtly praise, that inevitably shifted into comparisons with Yoriichi's godlike genius. He braced himself for me to dismiss his efforts in favor of his younger brother. Sensing his rising tension, I decided to steer the conversation away from swordsmanship. When I asked him how old he was, Michikatsu simultaneously blurted out an instinctual invitation for me to watch Yoriichi practice instead. Realizing his mistake, he awkwardly stopped and answered my question, revealing that he was only 6 years old. His answer shocked me. To blend in as a typical 12-year-old boy, I had adjusted my body's height to around 130 centimeters. Yet, the 6-year-old Sugekuni brothers stood as tall as my 12-year-old form. Realizing they were still only 6 made me understand that Yoriichi was at the exact age where his talent was awakening, meaning the original timeline had not shifted after all. Noticing Michikatsu's confusion at my sudden silence, I stood up and measured our heights side by side, pointing out that despite being 12 years old, we were the same height. Realizing I had mistaken him for a 12-year-old because of his impressive stature, Michikatsu flushed with quiet embarrassment and softly acknowledged the fact. During my stay at the Tsugekuni estate, I spent my days sitting quietly in the shade under the eaves. I regularly watched Michikatsu practice his swordsmanship from dawn to dusk, dripping with sweat as he pushed his physical limits. Meanwhile, Yoriichi often sat nearby in silence, staring at me with a wordless, intense focus. The silent standoff between Yoriichi and me triggered an instinctual, soul-shaking alarm within my demon blood, yet that dangerous reaction made me feel genuinely alive. I found myself strangely fond of Michikatsu. His strict self-discipline and constant anxiety over failing to meet high standards reminded me of the competitive educational pressures from my past life. Watching his quiet struggle evoked a nostalgic longing for my distant hometown, helping me feel human again. One day, while Yoriichi was away, Michikatsu approached me and hesitantly asked why Yoriichi always stared at me so intently. I casually suggested that Yoriichi and I simply disliked each other, but Michikatsu immediately disagreed, insisting that his younger brother was actually fascinated by me, much like how he observed insects or kites. I interrupted him and remarked that Michikatsu truly loved his younger brother. At first, a pure, genuine smile lit up Michikatsu's face at the thought of loving Yoriichi. However, that joy was almost instantly swallowed by deep pain and jealousy over Yoriichi's superior talent. Watching this intense, contradictory storm of emotions swirl across his face, I felt a deep sense of wonder and exclaimed that Michikatsu was truly amazing. My sudden praise completely baffled Michikatsu once again. Previous experiences had taught him that whenever I complimented him, he would experience an embarrassing, uncontrollable physical reaction. His heart would race, his head would grow dizzy, and his face and ears would flush with heat. Determined to avoid triggering that overwhelming reaction again, Michikatsu refrained from asking why I praised him. He simply turned his head away, maintained his composure as the eldest son, and softly muttered a quiet thank you. Feeling slightly relieved by my recent words of affirmation, Michikatsu walked toward his father's study with a faint hope of reporting his progress. However, before knocking, he overheard his father telling a subordinate that Yoriichi's divine talent was a treasure, while Michikatsu, though hard-working, lacked the natural brilliance the clan needed. Deciding to replace Michikatsu as the heir, his father expressed that the family needed a sword of ultimate glory rather than mere hard work. Stunned and heartbroken, Michikatsu silently backed away. In his distress, Michikatsu sought comfort in his mother's secluded courtyard. He found her chanting before a Buddhist altar, praying for Yoriichi's improving health. Though she greeted him gently and reminded him to take care of his younger brother, Michikatsu felt that the warmth that usually comforted him had faded. Feeling an empty, icy loss, he realized that this sanctuary no longer offered him genuine reassurance. After leaving his mother, Michikatsu wandered to my room. Inside, I sensed his presence through the crack in the paper door. To avoid interrupting his thoughts, I waited quietly. Through the screen, I watched his shadow raise a hand to knock, only to hesitate and pull back repeatedly in a silent struggle. When he raised his hand for the fourth time, I opened the door. I grabbed his suspended hand and gently knocked it twice against the door panel, telling him that he had now knocked. I then invited him inside. Stepping into my dim, cool room, where thick curtains blocked the bright midday sun and only a few small lamps burned, Michikatsu entered a quiet world completely isolated from the outside. Sugikuni Michikatsu stepped hesitantly into my room, and I closed the door behind him. The heavy curtains blocked out all daylight, leaving only dim orange lamps flickering in the dark. At first, the pitch-black room triggered unpleasant memories for Michikatsu, reminding him of when his father locked him in dark, solitary confinement for 3 days just for fearing the dark as a young child. Yet, as he sat down, he realized this darkness felt like a protective cocoon, hiding his vulnerability and freeing him from expectations. I apologized for the dark setting, explaining that my sickly body required me to stay away from strong light. Michikatsu admitted that the darkness felt good. When I asked why he came, he claimed he was merely passing by. I mentioned seeing his shadow hesitation on the paper screen outside, causing his face to flush with embarrassment in the dark. I reassured him that next time, I would patiently wait for him to knock on his own. Noticing his unusually neat attire, I asked if he was taking a break from sword training. Michikatsu lowered his head and explained that he had visited his mother in her remote courtyard. When I asked what his mother was praying for at her Buddhist altar, Michikatsu answered softly that she was praying for his younger brother, Yoriichi. Saying those words triggered a wave of agonizing emotions inside Michikatsu. Reminders of his father's harsh expectations, his mother's single-minded devotion to Yoriichi, and the servant's constant comparisons flooded his mind. He began hyperventilating in the dim room, his body trembling as nausea and suffocating dizziness washed over him. Clenching his abdomen and covering his mouth, he let out a painful, uncontrollable sob. As he doubled over in agony, a cold, desperate thought filled Michikatsu's mind. He felt that everything was over. His role as the heir, his personal dignity, and the pride he had worked so hard to maintain were all utterly shattered. Realizing that Sugikuni Michikatsu's sudden breakdown began when he mentioned his mother praying for Yoriichi, I decided to fix my mistake directly. I grabbed his cold wrist and led him out of the room into the bright afternoon sun. Navigating through secluded alleys to avoid servants, I pulled him into the mountains to an abandoned, desolate shrine on a nearby hillside. Standing before the decaying torii gate and mossy stone steps, Michikatsu asked why we were there. I calmly explained that since he wanted blessings as well, I brought him to the only temple I knew, reasoning that all gods were essentially the same. Inside, we found a broken, headless statue covered in cobwebs. Seeing Michikatsu still looked unhappy, I offered to pray for him myself. Michikatsu hesitated, pointing out that praying required proper offerings, incense, and ritual fasting. Unbothered, I gathered 3 dry branches for incense and placed a cluster of white wildflowers on the dusty altar. Recognizing his hesitation as a child's way of being secretly eager, I ignored his objections and knelt on the dusty floor. Clasped hands together, I offered a straightforward prayer in a flat voice, asking the gods to grant Michikatsu good health and good fortune. A moment later, Michikatsu silently knelt beside me. For a long time, he stared intently at the broken statue without saying a word. I waited patiently, knowing he struggled to speak about his own feelings. Nearly 2 hours passed as Michikatsu sat in extreme silent agony, cold sweat soaking his collar. Finally, using every last ounce of his courage, he squeezed out a soft, trembling whisper that barely carried through the air. "I hate Yoriichi." Saying those forbidden words drained all his strength, leaving him collapsed on the dusty ground, trembling violently in silent, broken gasps. Still lying on the cold floor of the shrine, Michikatsu confessed, through broken gasps, that his father had officially chosen Yoriichi as the heir. He tried to convince himself that it was only natural for the strongest samurai to inherit the family. Yet he couldn't help but feel intense resentment. Listening to him, I realized he was speaking directly to me. Despite his claim of hating Yoriichi, I knew he deeply cared for his younger brother, remembering every detail about him. However, his suppressed silence and intense, conflicting emotions were abnormal for a 6-year-old child. Recalling my knowledge of modern education, I bluntly told Michikatsu that he didn't actually hate Yoriichi, but was simply sick. Michikatsu looked up in confusion and asked if taking medicine from a doctor would cure him. I explained that because no physical pathogen caused his condition, a doctor couldn't treat the root cause of his mental suffering. Accepting this, Michikatsu brushed the dust off his clothes, and we headed back as the sky darkened. Upon our return to the Tsugakuni estate, Yoriichi ran up to us, eagerly asking where Michikatsu had been all day. Michikatsu forced a gentle smile, though his internal struggle remained evident. To help him out, I stepped in and explained that we had gone to the shrine to pray. Hearing this, Yoriichi smiled brightly and declared that he wanted to pray for Michikatsu too. This pure, unreserved affection crushed Michikatsu even further. Knowing he was destined to be replaced and discarded by the clan, while Yoriichi inherited everything, Michikatsu found his brother's love almost unbearably painful. Hastily changing the subject and forcing a weak laugh, Michikatsu grabbed my wrist and dragged me away to avoid facing Yoriichi any longer. A week after our trip to the shrine, Michikatsu sat in the courtyard and stubbornly insisted that he wasn't sick, declaring once more that he hated Yoriichi. Following his logic, I bluntly suggested that if he hated his brother, he should simply get rid of him. Michikatsu glared at me furiously, instantly rejecting the idea. I then suggested that, if he couldn't bring himself to resolve things with Yoriichi, or hate his brother, perhaps he actually hated the Sugakuni family, proposing that he burn the clan's estate down instead. Terrified, Michikatsu quickly covered my mouth and begged me not to joke like that, insisting that no one hates their own family. He murmured in fear that losing his family meant losing everything. Looking at him, I realized how foolishly he fought against himself. While others blamed the world when facing hardship, Michikatsu turned all his pain inward, believing everything was his own fault. When I concluded once more that he was simply sick, Michikatsu stopped denying it and quietly asked how long his illness would last. I honestly warned him that it might last until his grave. In my mind, I recalled his tragic future, how he would transform into an immortal monster, struggling for centuries, losing his memories, and labeling his young self as weak and ridiculous, all because he could neither surpass Yoriichi nor forgive himself. I asked Michikatsu why he was so determined to stay home and become the heir. He answered that his father had done the same, and that losers were driven out with nothing. When I asked why he needed to be better than Yoriichi, he asserted that as the older brother, he was supposed to be superior. Noticing the underlying contradiction in his thoughts, I remarked that he probably didn't have any friends. Michikatsu frowned and replied detachedly that samurai only maintained class hierarchies and family alliances, adding that friends disrupted order. Agreeing with his practical logic, I concurred that friends were indeed unnecessary. To my surprise, my agreement instantly upset Michikatsu, leaving him puffing out his cheeks in quiet anger. I have never understood how fanfiction protagonists easily socialize with young Sugikuni Yoriichi. In reality, Yoriichi is like an autistic child wrapped in thick walls. Ever since his father called him an unlucky son, Yoriichi completely shut himself off, rarely speaking or leaving his room. Passing by his classroom, Michikatsu and I saw Yoriichi's etiquette teacher shouting in frustration, while Yoriichi remained entirely unfocused. Noticing us through the window, Yoriichi tried to stand, but his teacher held him down, leaving him to give Michikatsu a silent glance. Michikatsu pursed his lips and pulled me away to his dojo. Sitting along the corridor, Michikatsu softly predicted that his father would send him away around the age of 10. Observing the twins, I realized how opposite they were. Yoriichi was quiet yet held an unshakable inner conviction, while Michikatsu seemed outgoing yet passively accepted his tragic fate. I told Michikatsu he wouldn't be sent away. When he assumed I was pitying him, I asked what he truly thought of Yoriichi. Michikatsu quietly described his brother as someone who shone as brightly as the sun. When I asked if he believed Yoriichi actually wanted to be the heir, Michikatsu froze. The mere thought of Yoriichi willingly giving up the head position out of charity enraged him, making him feel as though his dignity was being utterly shattered. He shouted that it was impossible, insisting that Yoriichi deserved the position because he was better at everything. Michikatsu cried out that if Yoriichi didn't care about being the heir, all his own years of hard work and sword practice would become a pathetic joke. I gently reminded him that a person's life value is never defined by being an heir or by comparing oneself to Yoriichi. Michikatsu was far too young, bound by samurai rules that forced him to identify solely as the eldest son, forgetting that his dedication and true self held inherent value. Michikatsu stared at me in childlike confusion. I added in a flat tone that it was fine if he didn't understand, as I didn't truly grasp abstract concepts like life's value either. Looking up at the sun, I knew my calm advice was just empty words, as I was certainly not a gentle person inside. On a drizzly day, Michikatsu's mother passed away. Standing on the periphery of the funeral, I watched Michikatsu kneel ramrod straight, holding back his tears with desperate calm. Surprisingly, his feudal father wept openly in the shadows, proving that even a cold heart feels the pain of death. Scanning the crowd, I noticed Sugikuni Yoriichi was absent. Realizing he might be preparing to leave without saying goodbye, I slipped away to intercept him at his mother's courtyard. Carrying a simple travel pack, Yoriichi tried to walk past me silently. I blocked his path repeatedly until he looked at me in silent confusion. I asked why he wasn't attending his mother's funeral and pointed out that Michikatsu was deeply grieving. Hearing his brother's name made Yoriichi soften with momentary hesitation, clutching his travel pack tightly. I knew that if Yoriichi disappeared now, Michikatsu would completely break down, destroying the value of my observations. However, despite my warning, Yoriichi eventually decided to continue walking away. His unpredictable nature unnerved me. To me, Yoriichi was like a cockroach, utterly incomprehensible, terrifying, and impossible to kill. Glancing at the crude wooden sword at his waist, I knew that, even as a 7-year-old child, he posed an existential threat to my life. Preparing for the worst, I extended all my bone whips, surrounding myself to guard against a sudden attack. Seeing my bizarre form, Yoriichi showed no fear. Instead, he casually placed his fingertips on the hilt of his wooden sword. That simple, natural gesture instantly froze the surrounding air, causing every bone whip in my body to tense in sheer alarm. Before Yoriichi and I could clash, Michikatsu suddenly appeared at the end of the path. Seeing Yoriichi packed for a long journey and me blocking his way, Michikatsu's pale face contorted with panic, anger, and grief. Overwhelmed by the fear of being abandoned, Michikatsu squeezed out a hoarse question, asking if Yoriichi was leaving too. Seeing his brother's desperation, Yoriichi released his wooden sword and obediently followed Michikatsu back home. A few days later, Michikatsu came to my room. Remembering my promise to wait, I stayed silent until he finally knocked on his own. Tired and uncertain, Michikatsu asked me to accompany him back to the abandoned shrine to pray. I teased him about his lack of formal preparation, but stepped out with him as he handed me an umbrella. At the shrine, I replaced the withered flowers on the altar with fresh ones and knelt to pray for him. Michikatsu knelt beside me and thanked me for stopping Yoriichi, expressing worry over how ill-prepared his brother had been to travel alone. He then shared that their father had changed his mind about sending Michikatsu away. Before dying, their mother had left a letter begging her husband to raise both brothers equally. Yielding to her final wish, their father agreed to let both twins remain in the clan. When I asked Michikatsu what he planned to do next, he replied in a low voice that he would likely serve as Yoriichi's bodyguard and protect the family. Though he claimed this ending was far better than being exiled to a temple, his tone faltered. While sorting through his mother's belongings, Michikatsu had discovered her diary. It revealed that Yoriichi clung to their mother not out of childish affection, but to physically support her failing body. Realizing Yoriichi had silently carried this burden, while he himself had remained blind to her critical condition, Michikatsu was consumed by a fresh wave of intense jealousy and self-loathing. Panicked and deeply shaken, Michikatsu began to doubt whether staying was truly a blessing. Remaining in the clan meant living forever in Yoriichi's blinding shadow, whereas going to a temple would have at least freed him from the constant source of his torment. Seeing Michikatsu's deep distress, I suggested that we leave the Tsugikuni clan together. For a brief second, a glint of desire flashed in his eyes, but his ingrained samurai sense of honor quickly crushed it. To Michikatsu, escaping meant admitting total defeat to Yoriichi and becoming a disgraceful deserter, which terrified him more than failure itself. He hoarsely asked if running away would mean throwing away his last bit of dignity. Knowing he lacked the courage to make such a choice alone, I calmly offered to push him from behind and take him away myself. My words deeply moved him, making him want to cry from the overwhelming feeling of being understood and chosen. Yet, his fear of proving himself useless held him back. Sensing his intense internal conflict, I told him he was only 7 years old and had time to think it over. Realizing he didn't have to make an immediate decision brought him immense relief. He solemnly clasped his hands before the broken Buddha statue and offered a quiet prayer. When he finished, Michikatsu offered me his hand with a relaxed, genuine smile to help me up from the floor. Following that day, a heavy burden seemed lifted from his shoulders. He relaxed significantly and even began helping Yoriichi with his homework, patiently telling his brother to listen to their teacher. Observing them, I realized that being together was actually healing both brothers. Yoriichi's quiet isolation softened around his older brother, while Michikatsu slowly began reconciling with his past pain by staying close to Yoriichi. Watching their bond grow, I recognized how blood ties could cause immense suffering, yet simultaneously serve as a healing balm. However, while the brothers moved forward and healed, I remained trapped in the same place without making any progress. The emotional answer and path home I sought still eluded me. Watching everyone else move on while I remained stuck in the fog, I secretly resented the change, realizing I was harboring selfish thoughts once again. After spending a long time with the Tsugakuni clan, my adoptive father finally brought me home. Michikatsu saw me off, shyly hoping we could visit the shrine together again next time, to which I agreed. A few days after returning, a sharp, rhythmic whistle suddenly exploded inside my mind. I then remembered that centuries ago, I had given a bone whistle made from my flesh to a member of the Ubuyashiki family. Surprised that it was being blown after all these years, I decided to use this event as an excuse to leave my current life and investigate the source. To make my disappearance seem natural, I stepped out onto the street and allowed a group of local human traffickers to drug and kidnap me. Once their carriage reached the outskirts, I easily escaped, leaving behind a perfectly believable disappearance. Following the direction of the whistle, I tracked its signal to a massive, heavily guarded estate filled with patrolling Demon Slayer Corps members. Realizing I had arrived at the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, I felt speechless. Instead of destroying my bone whistle, the Ubuyashiki family had brought it to their main base and passed it down. Slipping into the central residence, I found the person blowing the whistle. A tearful 4-year-old child, with the signature black hair and purple eyes of the Ubuyashiki clan. Since the bone whistle produced no sound in the real world, only echoing directly inside my head, I told him to stop blowing. The startled child quickly wiped his tears, trying to maintain a serious composure. Before my body could revert to its adult form, he nervously asked if I was the flute immortal. Rather than explaining that I was a demon, I simply nodded and sat beside him. He forced an awkward, stiff smile, his small body trembling with tension. When I asked why he was blowing the whistle, he glanced nervously toward the ceiling. Following his gaze, I saw a white ribbon carefully tied to a roof beam, positioned at the exact height for him to hang himself. I found myself facing a major puzzle in the form of this young Ubuyashiki child. Unlike the calm ancestors I remembered, he cried silently every day while managing mountains of official business, though he could instantly wipe his tears and act like a composed leader whenever visitors arrived. Furthermore, the strong scent of wisteria in his room irritated my skin and made me want to sneeze. Late one night, after he finished his work, I found him staring blankly at a white silk sash with tears streaming down his face. Taking advantage of the quiet moment, I asked why he had blown the bone whistle that day. Tears blurring his pale purple eyes, he explained that the head of the Ubuyashiki clan always inherited a small sachet containing ancestral instructions to open it only when all hope was lost. After his father died of illness, his traumatized older brother set himself on fire, and his mother and sister perished trying to save him. Left as the sole survivor forced to inherit the leadership, he opened the sachet in his profound grief. Finding only the strange bone whistle inside, he blew it in utter despair right before preparing to hang himself with the white silk. Though I had never expected my ancient token to be used this way, I told him that blowing the whistle granted him one request for my help. When I asked what he wanted me to do, he clutched the white silk and sobbed that he did not know, confessing that my sudden appearance had disrupted his courage to end his life. Honor-bound by my ancient promise, I declared that I would stay by his side until he decided what he wanted. He stared at me intently and introduced himself as Ubuyashiki Tsukihotaru, asking for my name. I casually told him to call me whatever he liked. As he observed me closely, he mentioned that he was still crying. Confused by his illogical remark, I frowned as he suddenly reacted with visible astonishment, looking at my face, as if he had just discovered something incredible. Uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny, I directly asked him what he was looking at. Ubuyashiki Tsukihotaru did not answer my question, but he began inviting me to eat with him. When he offered me glutinous rice balls, I pierced one with a bamboo skewer and mimicked the chewing motions of human eating. Since I cannot digest human food without tasting repulsive rot, I always perform a calculated swallowing motion, so I can quietly spit it out later. He then offered me an apple, and I feigned chewing through its bitter, nauseating sourness before swallowing it whole. Suddenly, Tsukihotaru asked softly if I was unable to eat. I was genuinely shocked that this fragile child had exposed my pretense. He explained that he noticed my chewing habits were unnaturally precise, always taking 9 to 13 chews for meatballs. 6 to 8 for rice, and 3 to 5 for fruit. Astonished by his terrifying power of observation, I internally labeled him cockroach number 2. When he asked what I actually ate, I told him I didn't need food. He studied my face and gently asked if I was angry, but I dismissed anger as an inefficient emotion. I then noticed that the irritating scent of wisteria in his room had faded, as he had stopped drinking wisteria tea to accommodate me. Tsukiyotaru returned to his desk, silently crying as he reviewed official documents. Wondering why he was always so tearful, I asked why he never smiled like the other gentle, compassionate leaders of the Ubuyashiki clan. The ink bled on his paper as he admitted he saw nothing to smile about. He confessed that because of the family curse, he lived in constant terror of death. He believed he lacked his father's intelligence and his brother's sense of responsibility, feeling that an incompetent survivor like himself would only cause demon slayers to die in vain. Utterly unable to offer encouraging words or a reassuring smile, he sobbed that he saw only endless darkness ahead on an impossible path. I tried to comfort young Ubuyashiki Tsukihotaru in a gentle tone, saying every life has value and that his family heritage had survived to this day. However, he looked at me and directly exposed my insincerity, noting that I didn't actually believe my own words. He was right. My mind values no life other than my own. If I fail to find a way home or regain my human emotions by the end of the story, I plan to end my life, as Yoriichi and Tanjiro are the only ones capable of truly destroying me. Despite my lack of genuine feeling, Tsukiyotaru remarked that my words possessed a comforting, almost magical quality. He then pointed out that I was angry. I struggled to understand my own irritation, wondering if I was frustrated by having my human disguise exposed. I bluntly warned him that a flesh-eating beast only speaks human language to deceive, but Tsukiyotaru softly insisted he didn't view me as a beast. He gently asked if my comforting actions, listening to him cry and staying by his side, were actually lingering remnants of my human heart. His pure, sincere words left me completely speechless and deeply infuriated. I realized this 4-year-old child was like a spider, silently weaving fine threads to trap me. Refusing to continue the conversation, I told him to finish his work and retreated to my room next door. Looking into the mirror, I stared at my ashen face and tried to fix the flaws in my human disguise. I attempted to force a smile, but my expression looked absurd and made my facial muscles ache. I then tried imitating a terrified face, but it appeared completely unnatural and bizarre. Staring into the mirror, I realized my dead, emotionless eyes were the true source of the uncanny feeling, proving that a demon is ultimately only suited for a poker face. As I continued practicing facial expressions in front of the mirror, Ubuyashiki caught me red-handed. When I claimed I was practicing a terrified expression, he effortlessly demonstrated a series of vivid facial expressions, anger, confusion, and fear, replicating even a complex artistic painting with ease. Suddenly, he suffered a violent coughing fit, signaling that the family curse was taking its toll. As his health worsened, he confessed that he would soon be unable to consume sweet treats. I made him a warm cup of honey water, which he sipped slowly. When his vain Kasugai crow arrived, I mentally compared pets to their owners, but Ubuyashiki accurately guessed my thoughts. He deduced that I viewed him as an insect, specifically a spider, because of how I stared at him. He then asked why I always addressed him solely by his family name, urging me to learn his full name, Ubuyashiki Tsukihotaru. I explained that my mind filters out useless human names, but he gently countered that names hold immense weight. He emphasized that if I wished to integrate into human society, I needed to understand that calling someone by their name affirms their unique existence. Accepting his advice, I awkwardly pronounced his name Tsukihotaru. When he asked for my name in return, I hesitated, as my original human name was long forgotten. Eventually, I gave him the name Tsukihiko. Satisfied, Tsukihotaru asked why I viewed him as a spider. I admitted that his thoughts were completely unreadable, yet he constantly wove an invisible web around me. Hearing this, he smiled with quiet pride, fully aware that alongside Yoriichi, he was one of the few humans who truly baffled me. When Ubuyashiki greeted me the next morning, I mispronounced his name once again. He sighed, asking why I could never remember it. I candidly admitted that he simply wasn't important enough for my brain to prioritize. Rather than getting angry, he apologized, stating that I needed a positive, bright person to help me instead. I realized then that despite his constant crying and self-doubt, 12-year-old Suki Hotaru possessed the same unbreakable core as his ancestors, capably managing clan affairs without ever actually asking for my help. Noticing him check the decaying skin on his cheek using one of the hand-polished mirrors I gifted him every birthday, I listened as he announced he was meeting his fiancée that afternoon. He explained that marrying a priestess's daughter was a tradition meant to delay the curse, though he planned to let her refuse the marriage if she wished, avoiding tying her to a husband destined to die young. Unexpectedly, the marriage took place because the priestess's daughter accepted the proposal. She was a delicate, gentle girl 4 years older than Suki Hotaru. When we met, she shyly addressed me as brother. Sensing my confusion, she explained that Suki Hotaru had told her about me and secretly regarded me as his elder brother. Curious, I asked why she agreed to marry into the Ubuyashiki family despite knowing the heavy, tragic fate awaiting her husband. Blushing, she confessed that she found Suki Hotaru much more composed than others and particularly liked his calm, serious personality. I acknowledged his quiet nature, and she introduced herself as Issei Kamigori. I asked Ubuyashiki Tsuki Hotaru about his wife, mentioning that he viewed me as an elder brother. Looking up from his documents, 16-year-old Tsuki Hotaru confessed that I strongly resembled his late older brother in speech and mannerisms. He shared a painful memory, revealing that his brother had set himself on fire, causing his mother and sister to die in the flames trying to save him, all to ensure Tsuki Hotaru inherited the headship. Hearing his guilt, I instinctively offered comforting words, telling him he had done a wonderful job. My words broke through his calm mask, causing him to weep openly for the first time in 10 years. Tsuki Hotaru gently thanked me, insisting that despite my self-doubt, my comforting words were never lies, and that I was truly a good person. Later that spring, Tsuki Hotaru's wife, Issei, gave birth to a baby boy. Finding her under the veranda, I briefly held the fragile, smiling infant before handing him back. I noticed Issei staring into space with deep worry. She confessed her fear that Tsuki Hotaru did not truly care for their family, as she had never seen him smile. I reassured her, explaining that Tsuki Hotaru cared deeply for her, noting how he had originally planned to let her decline the marriage to spare her a tragic fate. I advised her to speak openly with him about her fears. Relieved, Issei smiled and warmly thanked me. Leaving her, I walked through the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters with my umbrella, amused by the absurdity of a demon casually strolling through demon hunter territory in broad daylight. Coming to a lush forest, I stopped as I spotted a bright yellow figure sitting quietly on a stone near the pond. In a tranquil grove within the Demon Slayer Corps compound, I met a vibrant man named Rengoku Onjuro. With his fiery red and yellow hair and large owl-like eyes, he was full of life. Our first meeting occurred in this forest when he casually struck up a conversation, loudly explaining that listening to birdsong relaxed him after completing dangerous missions. I found his frank, straightforward nature refreshing, as it required no complex analysis to understand his thoughts. Snapping me out of my thoughts, Rengoku loudly asked if I had finally discovered the beauty of birdsong. He patted my shoulder and praised me, claiming that I possessed an exceptionally strong, resilient heart that nothing could defeat. His words puzzled me. While he meant a heroic human willpower that never gives up in the face of darkness, my rational mind knew I lacked such virtue. If faced with an unwinnable fight against Yoriichi, I would abandon my dignity and flee without hesitation. Rengoku shared that during a recent mission, he met a man whose wife and child were killed by demons, sitting beside their bodies for 10 days. Sorrowful over the tragedy, Rengoku reflected on his family's long legacy as demon hunters. When I asked what drove his generations of conviction, his eyes burned with fervor. He declared that knowing evil demons caused such tragedies everywhere made him determined to protect innocent people and eradicate every ghost in the world. Listening to his passionate speech, I almost laughed out loud at the irony. I wondered what expression he would make if he knew that I, his close friend, was actually a demon. Rengoku trusted me completely, inviting me to get together whenever he returned from missions, and even introducing me to his younger siblings as a reliable friend. I admitted to harboring a genuine affection for him, as conversing with him brought me a rare sense of satisfaction. However, it was not yet time to reveal my true identity, as I still needed to observe him to understand the human nature I lacked. Rengoku invited me to visit a remarkable new swordsman he met, a man who deeply resembled me. Moving through the shady paths of the Demon Slayer compound, Rengoku asked why my courtyard lacked wisteria flowers. I claimed I was allergic to their scent, teasingly remarking that my sunlight aversion and wisteria allergy made me sound just like a demon. Rengoku immediately took the comment seriously, warning me never to joke about such pathetic creatures. Suddenly, a cold chill ran down my spine as I spotted Sugikuni Yoriichi standing nearby. Now an adult member of the Demon Slayer Corps, Yoriichi completely concealed his formidable aura. Noticing the subtle tension, Rengoku stepped forward to shield me with his broad haori before inviting us to sit down for tea. We accompanied Yoriichi to his room. In an indirect attempt to test me, Yoriichi served me water floating with wisteria flowers. Rengoku quickly intervened, explaining my allergy. I remarked that Yoriichi lacked skill in tea making, prompting Rengoku to head to the kitchen to prepare proper tea himself. Once Rengoku left, Yoriichi immediately placed his hand on his Nichirin sword, his aura turning sharp and lethal. Remaining calm, I swirled my cup and asked if he truly wanted to start a conflict here. I explained that I was satisfied with my peaceful life and had no intention of hurting anyone. Appealing to the memory of his lost wife, I urged him not to bother me, sternly warning that if he forced my hand, I would not hesitate to fight to the death, and that Rengoku was present as well. Hearing my mention of a cherished life, Yoriichi froze, his knuckles tightening on his sword. Looking at me with red, divine eyes, he finally uttered my former name, Kibutsuji Muzan. The ancient chill of encountering my natural enemy swept over me once more, as Yoriichi stood before me like a punishing deity, demanding to know what I truly considered life to be. Faced with Yoriichi's heavy question about what I considered life to be, I chose avoidance. I asked why he was posing such a question to me, and whether he assumed I represented all demons. Yoriichi remained calm, stating that I was Kibutsuji Muzan. I lazily leaned against the table and told him I no longer used that name, asking him to pretend he didn't know me and stop causing trouble for others. Yoriichi pressed on, seeking an answer from me at this present moment. Having lost his beloved wife and child to demons, he stubbornly wanted to know why evil spirits killed humans and destroyed happiness. Tracing the rim of my teacup, I replied that knowing the answer changed nothing, since the dead could not return. When he tried to question me further, I covered my ears with my hands to childishly block out his voice, leaving Yoriichi utterly speechless by my shameless refusal to converse. Just then, Rengoku returned with the tea tray and asked if I was feeling unwell. I lowered my hands and casually lied that an annoying bird was making a noisy, terrible sound nearby. Yoriichi immediately picked up on the insult, while Rengoku burst into bright laughter. Glad that I was finally paying attention to birdsong. As we drank tea, Rengoku and Yoriichi discussed recent events and swordsmanship. Yoriichi mentioned breathing, explaining that his unique breathing techniques made him stronger than ordinary people, though he struggled to describe his internal world further. When sunset approached, Rengoku stood up to say goodbye. As I followed him out, I secretly gestured to Yoriichi behind Rengoku's back, pointing at him, then at myself, and crossing my arms into an X, to demand he leave me alone. Yoriichi stared back calmly with his ruby eyes, raised his own hands, and meticulously mimicked my X gesture to reject my rejection. Seeing his silent defiance, I looked away and quickly followed Rengoku out. The next morning, I opened my door to find Sugikuni Yoriichi standing outside in the morning light. He seriously stated that since I refused to answer his question because we weren't familiar, he wanted to get to know me better. When I tried to slam the door in his face, he effortlessly held it open. As I grabbed my umbrella to leave, he blocked my every move. I told him to go ask another demon for answers, but he insisted I was the most unique ghost he had ever encountered. When I mockingly asked if he could become bright and cheerful like Rengoku, he froze in confusion. I waved my hand, chanting retreat, retreat, retreat until he finally left. A few days later, Rengoku brought Yoriichi right into my room. Rengoku enthusiastically announced that since both Yoriichi and I were introverted, he wanted to help us become close friends. Ignoring my objections, Rengoku quickly excused himself, leaving us alone. Looking at Yoriichi sitting rigidly in my room, I felt as though my territory had been invaded by another wild beast. To keep up appearances for Rengoku's sake, I broke the silence by mentioning his upbringing in the Tsugikuniki clan and asking if he had run away from home again. Just as Yoriichi began to mention his older brother, I intentionally cut him off to vent my annoyance, leaving him speechlessly dejected. Regaining his composure, Yoriichi immediately stared into my eyes and repeated his relentless question once more, asking what I valued life to be. Realizing he functioned like a broken game NPC stuck on a single topic, I ushered him back outside. Before shutting the door in his face, I recited my weird incantation once again. Retreat, retreat, retreat. To escape Sugikuni Yoriichi's relentless harassment, I hid under the table in Ubuyashiki Tsukihotaru's room. Yoriichi's constant tracking made it impossible for me to focus on observing Rengoku, severely disrupting my research. Moreover, Yoriichi's repetitive question about what I valued life to be bored me endlessly. Since Yoriichi had a limited social circle, he never expected me to be hiding in the Lord's residence. After an hour, I emerged from under the table and noticed that half of Tsukihotaru's face was now covered in hideous curse marks, leaving his eyes unfocused and blind. Sensing my gaze, he asked if I was angry. I admitted that my time for research was limited because human life is far too short. Tsukihotaru interpreted my remark as sorrow over his impending death, though he lamented that his blindness prevented him from seeing my facial expression. He handed me the hand-polished mirror I had gifted him. Looking into it, I saw my face remained completely expressionless, proving I wasn't truly grieving. Handing it back, I told him his intuition was wrong, but he gently replied that at least in my eyes, he would always remain whole. Hearing a bird singing outside, I asked if he heard it, explaining that it was a Japanese white-eye bird, which symbolizes dawn, vitality, and fresh beginnings. Tsukihotaru sighed, expressing happiness that I was beginning to understand human feelings, even though he couldn't smile as openly as Rengoku. When I noted that he no longer used respectful terms with me, he calmly explained that he viewed me as his elder brother and friend. Hearing him define our 12-year relationship so directly struck a strange chord within me. Looking at his fragile, curse-ravaged face, I wondered whether my cold, self-centered heart would shed any tears on the day he finally died. Unsure of what my true answer would be. Since Tsugikuni Yoriichi was constantly busy on the front lines slaying demons, he had little time to bother me. One day, Rengoku came to my room and sincerely apologized for forcing us together. I accepted his apology and asked why he was so determined to make me friends with Yoriichi. Rengoku explained that, because Yoriichi and I seemed so similar, he believed we would feel at home with one another. I shook my head, unable to see any resemblance between myself and Yoriichi. Recalling my childhood with Michikatsu, I remembered how I had deliberately cut ties with other children to prioritize Michikatsu, realizing that humans harbored possessive desires in close friendships. I told Rengoku that I lacked the energy to make friends unless someone possessed something useful to me. I pointed out that despite having nothing in common with Rengoku, we were still friends, which contradicted his theory. Rengoku crossed his arms like a puzzled owl, admitting he didn't fully understand it either, but simply felt through intuition that communicating with Yoriichi would bring positive change. He then asked if I had befriended him solely because I found him useful. I readily admitted it, explaining that as an exceptionally capable person with vast knowledge and refined upbringing, I had every right to choose my friends based on high standards. Instead of taking offense, Rengoku burst into clear, bright laughter. He declared that he felt honored to be considered useful and chosen by such an incredible person. He apologized for interrupting my plans, reassuring me that I had every right to make my own choices. Walking to the window to let the fresh morning breeze in, Rengoku looked out at the bright courtyard. He shared his belief that rather than dwelling on the past, people should focus on the present, look toward the future, and never let anything stop them from moving forward. Standing quietly in the shadows, I observed him, deeply aware that while both of us constantly moved forward, we did so for opposite reasons. He moved forward driven by a burning, noble heart, whereas I moved forward simply because I cared for nothing around me. Once again, I recognized that Rengoku was my complete polar opposite. Through a casual conversation with Rengoku, I learned that Yoriichi had brought his older brother, Tsugikuni Michikatsu, to the Demon Slayer Corps after saving him from 2 demons. Hearing this news, I paused mid-sip. While Rengoku enthusiastically celebrated their reunion, I felt that seeing me again would only remind Michikatsu of his most vulnerable childhood years. Just as a recovered patient discards their crutches, I decided it was best to pretend we were strangers to avoid troubling him. However, the Demon Slayer Corps compound was small, and that afternoon I ran into the brothers in the hallway. Michikatsu wore a lavender kimono decorated with delicate wisteria patterns, walking ahead of Yoriichi just like when they were children. When our eyes met, Michikatsu gripped his sword hilt tightly, his handsome face frozen in shock and complex emotion. He clearly recognized me. Choosing not to disturb his peace, I walked past him without a word. Michikatsu looked away, quickening his pace to escape his past memories, as Yoriichi quietly called out to him. What I didn't see was how deeply our meeting shook Michikatsu. Back when we were 7, my sudden disappearance, staged via human traffickers, had left him devastated, feeling as if heaven had cruelly snatched away the only warmth he possessed. Seeing me today, elegant and refined in a dark kimono, Michikatsu had desperately wanted to speak to me and share how he eventually found the courage to leave his family on a moonlit night. Yet, assuming my trauma as a noble abducted by traffickers made me want to bury the past, he suppressed his urge and allowed us to pass like strangers. Once I disappeared down the corridor, Michikatsu anxiously turned to Yoriichi and asked if that was indeed Muzan, inquiring about when he joined and how he was doing. Yoriichi confirmed my identity, happily answering his brother's barrage of questions. When Michikatsu asked what we had spoken about, Yoriichi truthfully recounted my words. He explained that I no longer used the name Muzan, considered him a stranger who caused trouble, and wished to pretend we didn't know each other. Yoriichi even repeated my incantation, "Retreat, retreat, retreat." Hearing my words, Michikatsu turned pale, realizing I was severing all ties with our shared past. When Yoriichi softly asked if they should go see me, Michikatsu gave a wry, pained smile, shook his head, and replied that there was no need. Yoriichi knocked on my door and quietly squeezed into my room, sitting down on the tatami mat opposite me. Frustrated, I asked what he wanted. Instead of raising his usual philosophical questions, he asked why his older brother, Michikatsu, no longer associated with me. Sensing Yoriichi wanted to use me as a bridge to reconcile with Michikatsu, I asked how Michikatsu was doing. Yoriichi praised his brother like a bright moon, confirming that Michikatsu had asked about me. Curious as to why Michikatsu hadn't greeted me in the hallway, I pressed further. Yoriichi admitted that when he had asked Michikatsu if they should visit me, Michikatsu had simply said, "No need." I explained to Yoriichi that Michikatsu believed adults should go their separate ways gracefully. To signal the end of our conversation, I retrieved a warm boiled egg from the kitchen, rolled it in Yoriichi's palm and handed it to him. A subtle gesture meaning he should get lost. Confusion flashed across his face, but Yoriichi took the egg and left. Unbeknownst to me, Yoriichi went straight to Michikatsu and handed him the warm egg, claiming I had sent it as a gift. Michikatsu was startled, asking why Yoriichi had visited me again. Worried, Michikatsu asked what else we had discussed. Yoriichi explained that I had stated the 3 of us could never return to how we were in childhood, and that adults should go their separate ways. Sensing something suspicious, Michikatsu asked how I had handed over the egg. Yoriichi demonstrated by gently rolling his fingers in his palm, accurately recreating the motion of rolling an egg, leaving Michikatsu completely speechless at Yoriichi's bizarre misunderstanding. Sitting under a giant tree, Rengoku mentioned feeling watched. I grabbed his shoulder to stop him from turning around, explaining that Tsugikuni Michikatsu was spying on us from behind. Curious about our relationship, Rengoku asked if Michikatsu and I were close friends. I admitted we were childhood friends who had drifted apart, assuming Michikatsu saw no value in keeping in touch. When I revealed that Yoriichi had been relaying messages between us, Rengoku stood up in disapproval, shouting that personal feelings should always be expressed face to face. He then loudly called out to Michikatsu, inviting him to join us. Visibly embarrassed, Michikatsu emerged from the shade and sat down. Rengoku cleverly shifted his seat to sit on my other side, bringing all three of us together. Looking directly at Michikatsu, I asked if he still wished to be my friend. Michikatsu stared at me in shock, his face revealing the same hurt, vulnerable expression he had shown as a child. Realizing a major misunderstanding had occurred, I immediately apologized for not greeting him when we met in the hallway. Michikatsu hoarsely confessed that he thought I wanted nothing to do with him, explaining how Yoriichi had told him that I changed my name, abandoned the past, and wanted no disturbances. He added that the rolling egg Yoriichi brought back made him believe I was telling him to get lost. I quickly clarified that those harsh words and the rolling egg were meant entirely for Yoriichi to get rid of his constant harassment, not for Michikatsu. Hearing this, Michikatsu visibly relaxed, his clenched hands unfurling as his embarrassment gave way to relief. Michikatsu then asked what had transpired between Yoriichi and me. His question caught me off guard, making me wonder if he assumed Yoriichi and I were friends. I recalled Yoriichi's sharp, terrifying aura and his hand resting on his sword hilt every time he asked his sole question. What do you consider life to be? Stunned, I began to question whether I had completely misunderstood Yoriichi's true intentions as well. Reflecting on my childhood memories, I recalled how Yoriichi used to quietly follow Michikatsu and me everywhere. Back then, to build a bond with Michikatsu, I asked him out to fly kites or watch bugs, after noticing Yoriichi suggest those activities. Whenever I gave Michikatsu a gift, he would feel sad if he saw I had given it to someone else first, yet he would pass it to Yoriichi if Yoriichi received nothing. To solve this, I began giving gifts to both brothers, which genuinely delighted Michikatsu. This logical contradiction still baffles my rational mind. Why did Michikatsu crave exclusive favor, yet expect equal treatment for his brother? Humans defy all logic, driven by chaotic emotions that yield no practical gain. It leaves me wondering what the true core of humanity is, and how humans differ from beasts. I also wonder if Yoriichi considered our bond just as important as the relationship I painstakingly built with Michikatsu. Snapping out of my thoughts, I noticed Rengoku leaning back with hand on his sword hilt, staring at me with sudden vigilance and cold confusion. Sensing he saw something non-human in my eyes, I watched as he quickly composed himself and hesitantly patted my head to confirm I was safe. Curious, I tested whether I was radiating malice. An explicit lethal urge to tear Rengoku to pieces with my bone whips suddenly surged in my mind. Yet, Rengoku remained completely relaxed, gazing at me with his usual warmth, entirely unaware of my deadly thoughts. Turning to Michikatsu with the same intent, Michikatsu merely looked startled, completely failing to sense any actual malice. I began to realize that as a demon, my urge to kill might not even count as true malice. Perhaps Rengoku was right all along. I truly needed to have a serious conversation with Sugikuni Yoriichi. As a divine child of God, Yoriichi might be the only one able to see through the internal strangeness that I myself cannot comprehend, though I still doubt whether I can understand his cryptic perspective. I decided to accompany Sugikuni Yoriichi on his mission to West Mountain to privately ask what he meant by questioning what I valued life to be. As we sped through the forest under the moonlight, I asked why he considered me special. Yoriichi calmly stated that I was simply not human. When I pointed out that he knew this since childhood, he clarified that I was also completely different from other demons. I pressed him to explain this difference, but his limited vocabulary left him struggling to express his thoughts. Landing on a thick branch at the foot of West Mountain, Yoriichi stared obsessively into my eyes, attempting to transmit his silent thoughts directly into my mind. I told him our brainwaves were not on the same frequency, explaining it as a form of telepathy through the eyes. My explanation left him deep in thought as we continued into the woods. Following Yoriichi's Kasugai crow, we discovered a hunter's thatched house. Yoriichi's aura turned somber, and anger flared in his eyes as he approached a meat-drying rack in the yard. He pointed out that among the animal carcasses hung human flesh that had been stripped of its bones. Yoriichi carefully took the human remains down and dug a hole to bury them. As I watched Yoriichi stand silently before the burial mound, a chilling realization struck me. When I had looked at the drying rack earlier, I had felt no sense of horror or conflict, seeing human flesh mixed with animal meat. Rubbing my temples in deep bewilderment, I realized that I was losing my human perspective, forgetting even the basic human respect for funerals and memorial etiquette. After Yoriichi effortlessly eliminated the demons in the mountains, we walked back through the quiet woods. He finally found the words to explain the difference he saw, telling me that other demons sometimes felt human, whereas I did not possess a human feeling at all. I paused, amused and offended that bloodthirsty, desire-driven demons seemed closer to humanity in his eyes than I did. I asked Yoriichi if he considered us friends, to which he nodded without hesitation. I then tore away all pretense and directly questioned why he, Rengoku, and Ubuyashiki were always subtly terrified of me despite my normal, human disguise. I asked if they were reacting to hidden malice, or simply feeling an instinctive fear toward an incomprehensible monster, imitating human behavior. Hand resting near his Nichiren sword, Yoriichi showed a rare expression of solemn confusion and softly apologized. In that moment, my long-standing self-deception shattered completely. I realized my persistent longing to go home was merely a pale lie I had constructed for myself. As a demon incapable of genuine attachment, I could not truly care about home or family. Examining the world with human habits while perceiving it through a demon's cold indifference, I acknowledged that my last veil of human pretense was gone. Remaining calm, I admitted to Yoriichi that I was purely curious about humans, finding him genuinely interesting. Recognizing that my investigation into humanity had reached its end, I asked Yoriichi if he planned to kill me, noting that it would not be a bad place to stop. Since humans and demons are fundamentally different species, mutual understanding is impossible. Voice cracking with intense emotion, Yoriichi looked at me and asked once more what I took life to be. Staring at him, I finally grasped the true sincerity behind his repeated question, realizing I had been far too arrogant in thinking I could analyze human hearts and relationships through logic. Yoriichi stepped forward, reminding me that Michikatsu was still waiting for us to return. Laughing softly, I agreed to drop the subject for now and headed back. Following our conversation, Yoriichi began leaving daily apology gifts on my porch or windowsill. Smooth streamstones, unusual flowers, delicious wagashi, and today, an ordinary leaf. Holding the leaf up to the morning sun, I examined its intricate veins. Suddenly, I looked outside and noticed Rengoku standing in the courtyard. I was astonished by how stealthily he had approached, his presence suppressed like hidden embers. I quickly realized he had unlocked the transparent world technique through Yoriichi's influence. Using this supreme vision, Rengoku could clearly see the non-human blood and energy circulating within me, fully discovering that I was a demon. Despite seeing my true nature, Rengoku showed neither fear nor murderous intent. Calmly, he invited me to visit his family home, mentioning that his younger sister often brought me up in letters. Confused by his unexpected reaction, I asked if this was a rational, well-considered decision, and he firmly confirmed that it was. Driven by my inability to comprehend his logic, I agreed to accompany him. Upon arriving at the spacious Rengoku mansion, we were greeted by his father, younger brother, and 6-year-old sister, Aoi. The family gathered warmly around us, putting their training aside. When Rengoku asked about his mother, his father mentioned she was at the market. Rengoku then decided to check on her, asking me to stay with Aoi. As Rengoku, his father and his brother turned to leave, I instinctively called out his name. In unison, all 3 Rengoku men turned around, looking like a set of small, medium, and large owls, with their matching warm orange hair and bright eyes. Observing my reaction, Rengoku burst into bright laughter, reassuring me that he would return shortly. Aoi gently tugged my sleeve, offering an innocent smile identical to her brother's. With the 2 older owls returning to their training ground, I was left alone in the hall, with the fearless little girl clinging tightly to my sleeve. Rengoku's 6-year-old sister, Aoi, asked to braid my long dark hair. After finishing an intricate style, she showed me the mirror and asked why I always kept my eyes downcast. I explained that my red eyes were scary, so she ran off into the yard, retrieved several dew-glistening wildflowers, and tucked them into my dark braids. When Rengoku returned, he chuckled heartily upon seeing my wildflower-adorned hair. Telling Aoi it was time for school, he watched as she happily ran off, leaving us alone again. Unraveling the braids, I expressed confusion at his family's overly familiar behavior, but Rengoku cheerfully replied that seeing his sister get along so well with me was reason enough to smile. Changing the subject, I asked about his breathing style. Rengoku shared that, because Yoriichi's original technique was too complex for anyone to master directly, the swordsmen gathered to study it and created unique branch styles tailored to their individual strengths. Hearing how he pushed his physical limits in battle, I realized he would likely awaken a demon slayer mark soon. Rengoku noted that I seemed much more straightforward lately, correctly guessing I had spoken with Yoriichi. Tilted his head alongside mine. Rengoku suddenly called me an idiot. I defended myself, arguing that my rational choices always represented optimal objective solutions. Rengoku smiled gently, remarking that despite my intelligence, I constantly made mistakes on the simplest human matters. Before we could speak further, Rengoku's Kasugai Crow arrived with loud caws, delivering an urgent mission report regarding a demon attack in a nearby town. Rengoku's smile vanished, replaced by an intense, focused seriousness. He apologized for leaving abruptly, promising that after completing his mission in 2 days, we would meet in the grove, where we first encountered each other, to have a long-awaited heart-to-heart talk. As he prepared to depart, I reminded him that calling out purgatory caused his entire family to turn around at once. Rengoku paused and burst into warm laughter, telling me to remember his full name, Rengoku Onjuro, before striding off into the distance to fulfill his duty. On a drizzly morning, I noticed a spider weaving its web under the eaves, which unexpectedly brought Ubuyashiki Tsuki Hotaru to mind. I decided to visit him, only to find him lying motionless in bed. At 19 years old, his pulse had stopped just 20 minutes before my arrival. Intriguingly, his lips bore a peaceful, faint smile, leaving me puzzled as to why someone who claimed he could never laugh would die with a smile. My own reaction was entirely calm. I felt neither sadness nor joy at his passing. His wife entered carrying a basin of water, which crashed to the floor when I informed her of his death. Suppressing her tears, she explained that Tsuki Hotaru had requested a simple funeral to avoid disheartening the demon slayers. She shared that he had woken up earlier, dreaming of a warm stream and unseen family members waiting on the other side. Following tradition, Tsuki Hotaru was laid to rest in a simple ceremony at the Demon Slayer Core Cemetery, surrounded by his weeping wife, 3 young children, and emotional Kakushi members. Standing among the mourners, I felt completely out of place and quietly departed before the service ended. Sitting alone in my room, I pondered his death and concluded that funerals, tears, and tombstones were merely comforting performances the living put on for themselves. Lacking such human vulnerabilities, I required no such comfort. By the afternoon, the rain cleared and bright sunlight broke through the clouds. Rengoku's Kasugai Crow arrived at my window, loudly announcing that Rengoku Kyojuro had returned from his mission and reminding me of our promise to meet. My curiosity reignited. I retrieved my umbrella and prepared to leave. Before stepping out, I glanced at the windowsill and noticed that the spider and its web had completely vanished, leaving no trace behind. Without looking back, I strode off toward our meeting spot in the grove. I met Rengoku Onjuro by the stream, noticing a flying bird-shaped demon slayer mark on his cheek. When I explained that awakening, the mark meant he would not live past 25 due to immense physical strain, his initial shock quickly dissolved into a bright smile. He declared that he had no regrets, grateful that the mark's power helped him save innocent lives, and vowed to make the most of his remaining 5 years. Rengoku asked if I was in a bad mood, prompting me to inform him that Ubuyashiki had passed away. Learning of the Lord's death, Rengoku wept openly, his grief far more intense than when learning of his own shortened lifespan. perplexed by why he valued another's life over his own. I listened as he hoarsely asked if the Lord was in pain. I reassured him that Ubuyashiki died smiling. Rengoku explained that while his own life was his choice to burn, the Lord carried everyone's hopes. Though I insisted I was ready to listen to what he originally wanted to tell me, Rengoku gently patted my head and refused, sensing I was not in the right mood. Our conversation paused when a thud echoed from the woods. Investigating together, we found a blue feathered bird lying in the mud with an injured wing. Taking bandages and medicine from Rengoku, I carefully dressed the bird's wounds and bound its wing. I then handed the bluebird to Rengoku, noting that his naturally high body temperature would keep the cold creature warm until we reached a medical facility. Holding the bird gently, Rengoku smiled, explaining that bluebirds were legendary messengers of happiness that carried away misfortune and spread warmth. Looking up at me, he confidently declared that because we saved it, the bird would surely find happiness once more. The bluebird we saved was recovering well under my care. One evening, I took the bird for a walk on my shoulder and encountered Michikatsu practicing his swordsmanship in the courtyard. I noticed a red demon slayer mark on his face, similar to Yoriichi's. Sitting beside him on the veranda, I asked if all the pillars had awakened the mark. Michikatsu answered dryly that he didn't know, inwardly consumed by feelings of inferiority regarding his inability to match Yoriichi's natural genius or master sun breathing. Curious, Michikatsu activated the transparent world technique, peering directly into my body. His aura repeatedly vanished and reappeared as he saw my non-human anatomy. Watching him, I found his reaction fascinating, as it differed completely from Rengoku's response. Panicking from what he witnessed, Michikatsu stammered incoherently, warning me not to go outside during the day and telling me to stay away from the other pillars. Pretending not to understand his hidden meaning, I asked why he was acting so strangely. Sweating nervously, he blurted out that he simply wanted to talk to me. Internally, Michikatsu was in complete disarray, trying to guess when I had turned into a demon and assuming Yoriichi had already discovered my identity through his own transparent world. He deduced that Yoriichi must have spared my life out of childhood affection, while acknowledging that he himself could never bring his sword against me. Interrupting his chaotic spiral, my bluebird hopped onto Michikatsu's shoulder. I explained that the bluebird was said to bring happiness and suggested he let it sit there for a while. Seeing his distressed state, I invited him to open up and share his past experiences with me, assuring him that speaking in front of this symbol of happiness might bring warmth to the heavy thoughts in his heart. With the bluebird perched on his shoulder, Michikatsu finally found the courage to open up, sharing the long-buried story of how he left the Tsugakuni clan. Following my stage disappearance in childhood and his mother's passing, Michikatsu's father attempted to treat him and Yoriichi as equals, fulfilling his mother's dying wish. Yet, this change only brought Michikatsu intense unease and a visceral aversion toward Yoriichi, driven by jealousy over Yoriichi's innate, untouchable talent. While my presence had once kept him wavering, my disappearance planted the firm resolve in Michikatsu to leave the Tsugakuni clan. Recognizing he lacked Yoriichi's natural genius, Michikatsu forced himself to wait, diligently honing his swordsmanship, studying and learning how the outside world operated so he wouldn't perish as a helpless child. Dream memories of us praying together at a shrine further fueled his desire to break free on his own terms. By the age of 15, Michikatsu was ready. Having surpassed his swordsmanship master and acquired practical knowledge, he packed a small bag and an iron sword, planning a night escape. However, his father unexpectedly summoned him to the study during the day. Expecting fury upon being confronted about his plan to leave, Michikatsu braced for severe punishment. Instead, he saw his once formidable father sitting hunched and visibly aged. Softly, his father pointed to an old lantern on the table, telling Michikatsu to take it because he used to fear the dark as a young child. Feeling his father's quiet love for the first time, Michikatsu felt a deep, melancholic sorrow. He kowtowed 3 times in gratitude, picked up the lantern, and walked out. When night fell, Michikatsu set off under the cool moonlight. Realizing the dark was no longer terrifying, he set the lantern down by the roadside, leaving its warm glow behind. Free from the heavy constraints and repression of his upbringing, Michikatsu ran toward his new future with lightness in his heart. Life outside the Tsugakuni clan turned out much smoother than I had anticipated. Though I lacked Yoriichi's extraordinary genius, my daily hard work and perseverance refined my swordsmanship. I lived a carefree, independent life as a wandering knight-errant, helping others and protecting the weak. I believed this peaceful existence would continue forever, until fate played a cruel joke on me one moonlit night. While traveling through a desolate forest, I encountered two monstrous creatures reeking of blood. My years of combat experience kicked in, and I engaged them in battle. However, no matter how cleanly I severed their limbs or struck their heads, they regenerated rapidly before my eyes. As I struggled against these immortal monsters, a sudden, blinding light ripped through the darkness, radiating heat like the sun. It was Yoriichi, wielding a flaming sword and radiating a divine, overwhelming aura. With effortless, blinding speed, he decapitated both demons in a single strike, reducing them to ashes. Watching him easily accomplish in one move what I had desperately struggled to do brought back a wave of intense nausea and suffocating jealousy. Once again, I felt like worthless dust looking up at a radiant god. Yoriichi approached me with excitement, glad to see his older brother. When I bitterly noted that he was no longer dressed like the head of our clan, Yoriichi calmly replied that with me gone, there was no reason for him to stay. His casual abandon of the position I had spent my youth bound to ignited my hidden resentment even further. Yoriichi explained that these creatures were demons, vulnerable only to sunlight or specially crafted Nichiren swords. He shared that he had joined the Demon Slayer Corps and enthusiastically invited me to join him, praising my swordsmanship and expressing a desire to fight side by side. His dazzling smile and pure sincerity stung my eyes, causing my stomach to churn in disgust. Disgusted at the thought of following him like a weak lackey, I pressed my lips together, turned around, and tried to walk away in silence. However, Yoriichi suddenly grabbed my wrist with an inescapable, iron grip and dragged me along with him. That was how Yoriichi ultimately brought me into the Demon Slayer Corps. Listening to Michikatsu's memories, I realized it was a miracle Yoriichi had never been punched by him. When I asked if they communicated much, Michikatsu dryly replied that he avoided talking to Yoriichi, self-mockingly assuming Yoriichi was thriving and outshining everyone. Seeing how both brothers stubbornly believed the other was doing better, I chose not to waste effort correcting his belief, letting the superficial piece remain. When Michikatsu hesitantly tried to ask how I was doing, he abruptly cut himself off, realizing a demon could hardly be considered doing well. I told him he could still call me Muzan, explaining that my earlier refusal was due to a misunderstanding with Yoriichi. Relieved, Michikatsu agreed. As I prepared to leave with my bluebird, Michikatsu called out, his instincts unsettled by my presence. Through the transparent world, he perceived my power as a bottomless, flawless abyss, just like Yoriichi's. Still, he dryly offered that I could contact him if I ever needed anything. Walking back through the night, I reflected on my attempts to imitate human behavior by studying people like Rengoku, who possessed natural warmth. Holding the fragile bluebird, I realized that if the legend was true about it only leaving after seeing a happy smile, it would likely remain with me for life. Remembering the short lifespans left for Rengoku and Michikatsu due to their demon slayer marks, I considered turning them into demons, though Yoriichi would certainly try to kill me for it. Suddenly, Yoriichi appeared, having just returned from a mission. He handed me a miniature flute pendant, explaining expressionlessly that it reminded him of the flute Michikatsu made him in childhood, which brought him joy. When I noted that Michikatsu and I had resumed talking and told him Michikatsu was still awake, Yoriichi prepared to visit his brother. However, as I tried to walk past, Yoriichi stepped into my path, silently blocking my way just as he used to do when we were children. When Yoriichi silently transmitted his desire to speak with Michikatsu, I told him Michikatsu was likely showering after sword practice and wouldn't want to be disturbed in his pajamas. Yoriichi took this seriously and suggested visiting tomorrow. I declined, explaining I was busy visiting Rengoku Kyojuro. Though I prepared to leave, Yoriichi spoke up again. confessing he truly wanted to talk with his brother. Curious, I asked what they usually discussed. Yoriichi explained that he praised Michikatsu's moon-breathing style and shared interesting sights. Realizing Yoriichi remained blissfully unaware of how his praise triggered Michikatsu's deep insecurity, I jokingly advised him that if he wanted a real heart-to-heart, they should just fistfight while talking. Yoriichi pondered the suggestion earnestly. I then offered a deal. If he did me a favor tonight, I would accompany him to see Michikatsu tomorrow. Yoriichi enthusiastically agreed. We returned to my room, where I carefully placed the sleeping bluebird in its cage before stepping onto the veranda. Wanting to confirm if my brain structure differed from ordinary demons, I asked Yoriichi to inspect it with his transparent world. Before he could react, I split open my own skull above my brow, removed my warm, pulsating brain, and handed it to him. Shocked, Yoriichi solemnly held my living brain in his hands, using his transparent world to thoroughly examine its neural circuits. After a quiet moment, he noted that my brain structure was identical to that of an ordinary demon. Satisfied, I commanded my brain to return. To Yoriichi's utter bewilderment, the brain tissue sprouted fleshy wings and flew back into my open skull, which seamlessly sealed shut. Staring at his empty palms, Yoriichi remained frozen in silent shock. When I asked if he was scared, he shook his head, admitting he had never seen a brain fly. Demonstrating further, I detached my 5 fingers, which sprouted tiny legs, and walked across the wooden planks like insects. Yoriichi watched the wandering fingers quietly for a long time, finally uttering a brief, "Pretty good." Amused, I bade him good night until tomorrow. Early in the morning, Sugikuni Michikatsu washed up and prepared to greet me, his lips curling into a smile. However, his expression instantly froze when he caught sight of Yoriichi following right behind me. Yoriichi cheerfully wished his brother a good morning, triggering a familiar wave of nausea and stomach cramps in Michikatsu. I apologized for arriving so early, explaining that Yoriichi had insisted on coming at dawn. Michikatsu offered a weak, forced smile. Wanting to make the most of the moment, Yoriichi eagerly invited Michikatsu to practice swordsmanship or spar. Michikatsu felt sick to his stomach, interpreting the invitation as a veiled criticism of his skills. To him, Yoriichi's condescending habit of holding back during past spars always felt like a master tolerating a hopeless student. To break the suffocating tension, I suggested we eat breakfast first. Hearing this, Yoriichi immediately offered to cook. Desperate for an excuse to escape, Michikatsu firmly insisted on doing it himself. Yoriichi stepped in to stop him, and the two brothers began arguing over the trivial task. Grasping each other's shoulders, they engaged in a silent, stubborn test of physical strength. I watched them locked in this childish stalemate for a full hour, astonished by their stubbornness. Reluctantly, I stood up, pressed both of them down at the table, and went into the kitchen to prepare breakfast myself. Regretting his childish behavior, Michikatsu sat down silently. Overjoyed to be near his brother, Yoriichi sat down close to Michikatsu. Disgusted, Michikatsu moved away, but Yoriichi followed him. Trying to avoid Yoriichi's gaze, Michikatsu moved across the table, only to be met directly by Yoriichi's pure, bright eyes. The intense visual impact made Michikatsu's stomach churn even worse. Defeated, he moved back to Yoriichi's side, deciding that sitting next to him was better than facing him directly while eating. Yoriichi completely misinterpreted his brother's movement, assuming Michikatsu sat next to him out of affection and a telepathic connection. Radiating pure joy, Yoriichi stared intensely at Michikatsu's profile. Feeling a chill run down his spine at Yoriichi's cloying gaze, Michikatsu stared desperately toward the kitchen, praying for me to return quickly. Carrying the tray out, I saw Yoriichi staring intently at Michikatsu, whose face screamed for help. Observing how ill-suited Yoriichi was at sharing space with others, I realized Michikatsu's usual habit of ignoring his brother was actually a form of restrained gentleness. I set down simple rice balls and warm porridge for them. Observing the abundant food in the Demon Slayer core compound, I reflected on how material wealth fosters spiritual purity, allowing these swordsmen to nurture bright, noble hearts. I prepared only 2 meals, as both brothers knew my true nature, and there was no point in pretending to eat. Michikatsu noticed this and began to wonder how I managed my diet within the Demon Slayer Corps without anyone going missing. Observing Yoriichi's joyful gaze, Michikatsu quickly looked away and focused on his porridge, considering whether he should ask Yoriichi more about my situation later. After I cleared the dishes, the three of us sat quietly in the shade under the eaves. Michikatsu began to relax, finding the peaceful silence bearable. However, Yoriichi suddenly broke the quiet by eagerly inviting Michikatsu to a sword spar. With a throb of stomach pain, Michikatsu accepted through gritted teeth, seeing this as the perfect chance to vent his pent-up frustration. In the open courtyard, Michikatsu unleashed fierce, full-power strikes aimed at vital points, using his godlike brother as a punching bag. Yoriichi dodged and blocked with effortless grace, meticulously controlling his power to maintain the illusion of an evenly matched fight without hurting his brother. Watching them spar for nearly half an hour, I stood up and excused myself, mentioning I needed to return home to feed my birds. Michikatsu sheathed his sword, sweating from exertion. Before letting me leave, he took my umbrella, inspecting it inside and out, even briefly activating Transparent World to confirm my safety, and offered to escort me back. I politely declined the short 10-minute walk and turned toward the door. Just before stepping out, I turned back to Yoriichi, who was standing obediently in the sun, and asked him to visit my room tonight because I had something important to tell him. Yoriichi arrived at my courtyard on time, asking if I wanted him to examine my brain again. I declined and directly asked if he would cut me with his Nichirin sword using sun-breathing and a crimson blade, or even behead me, so I could experience a near-death state and understand the true meaning of life. Stunned and bewildered, Yoriichi sheathed his sword, turned away, and covered his ears in refusal. When I continued to plead, Yoriichi slowly raised his hand and threw a seemingly harmless punch toward my cheek. I felt no impact, but a sudden chill washed over my chest. Looking down, I was shocked to find an empty chest cavity. My body's instincts had reacted before my mind could, separating my heart and transforming me into my complete demonic form, with 17 bone whips deployed defensively. Like an animal cutting off its tail to survive an apex predator, my body had instinctively fled from Yoriichi's sheer terrifying presence. Yoriichi calmly noted that my detached heart was running away. Equipped with centipede-like legs, the heart scrambled toward the courtyard gate, crashing directly into Michikatsu's feet as he arrived to check on us. Using his transparent world, Michikatsu stood frozen in utter shock as he picked up the writhing, beating heart and nervously carried it to me, asking if I had dropped it. Thanking him, I tried to retrieve my heart, but my terrified cells were still out of control. As Michikatsu handed it over, the heart panicked and tried to sprout wings to escape. Yoriichi casually caught it in his palm, causing the frightened heart to instantly freeze and stop beating altogether. Taking my heart back, I pressed it into my chest cavity, allowing my flesh to seal seamlessly. Noticing how deeply shaken Michikatsu was by the absurd scene, I told him to rest early. Michikatsu immediately turned to leave, nervously glancing at my chest to ensure my heart wouldn't fall out again, while Yoriichi followed behind to escort him. As they walked away into the night, I remembered an unread letter from Rengoku, waiting for me in my room. Reading Rengoku's letter under the lamplight, I learned of his sister's progress, and that the Lord would reveal the Demon Slayer, Mark's 25-year lifespan limit, at the upcoming Pillar meeting. Rengoku expressed no regret in devoting his short life to protecting the world. Looking at the aging bluebird in its cage, I realized its life was ending, so I decided to take it to see Rengoku one last time. The next day, Rengoku met me by the forest pond. Watching the dying bluebird, he gently noted that the end of life was a time for peaceful rest, offering to accompany its final moments. Soon the bird breathed its last. When it died, I casually tossed its corpse onto the grass beside us. Rengoku's tone shifted dramatically into genuine fury. Confused by his intense anger, I admitted I threw the corpse away simply because it was dead, seeing no reason to hold a lifeless piece of flesh. The fury on Rengoku's face turned to a cold, profound shock. He realized that we perceived the world through fundamentally different cognitive lenses. Taking a step back, Rengoku asked if I had ever felt regret over the death of anything. My silence gave him his answer. Turning his back to me, Rengoku picked up the bird's corpse, declaring that he would bury it to preserve his own human dignity. He explained that reverence for life from birth to death is what truly defines humanity. For the first time, in a distant tone, he stated that we both needed time apart to rethink the nature of our friendship before walking away without looking back. Left alone by the pond, I reflected on his words. Humans slaughter countless creatures without hesitation, yet demand reverence for life. Realizing Rengoku could no longer coexist with me, I decided it was finally time to leave the Demon Slayer Corps. Preparing to leave the Demon Slayer Corps, I checked my mapped route. Before I could go say goodbye, Michikatsu visited me, melancholily sharing that the Lord had informed the pillars that those with the Demon Slayer mark would not live past 25. I assured him that Yoriichi was exceptional and would not die. Michikatsu readily accepted this, launching into an elaborate, poetic monologue praising Yoriichi's divine, immortal significance. Cutting off his endless praise, I asked if he had discovered his own sense of self-worth and purpose in life. Michikatsu looked confused, admitting he still did not understand why he was born into this world. I then mentioned my fallen friendship with Rengoku Kyojuro, explaining that different species could never truly understand or coexist with each other. Michikatsu insisted that he would never reject me over my identity as a demon. Pondering the human-demon dynamic, I noted that demons eat humans out of biological necessity, much like humans eat animals. However, because humans are a demon's sole food source, humanity views demons as an absolute threat. When I mused whether humans and demons could coexist if demons only killed for basic survival, Michikatsu quietly pointed out that humans would still refuse out of fear. Preparing to take my leave, I told Michikatsu I was departing and hoped that the next time we met, he would speak of his own worth with the same passion he used for Yoriichi. Suddenly, Michikatsu asked if a demon must seek out the Demon King, asking if becoming a demon was necessary. Surprised, I asked if he wished to become a demon to escape dying at 25. Michikatsu looked at me with unwavering determination. He admitted that promising to coexist with me was meaningless as a human. Since he lacked generational ties to the Demon Slayer Corps or a rigid commitment to their righteous path, he declared his willingness to cast his humanity aside and become a demon just like me. When Michikatsu declared his intention to become a demon, I warned him against impulsive decisions, recalling how Rengoku had impulsively invited me to his home before severing ties. Michikatsu remained steadfast, explaining that the choice felt right. I admitted that becoming a demon was practical for him, granting him time beyond his remaining 4-year lifespan to discover his true self without human constraints. Michikatsu asked if he needed to offer an enemy's head to prove his loyalty. When I replied that I had no use for human heads, he stared in shock, suddenly connecting the dots and asking who I truly was. I confirmed his suspicion. He asked if I was the Demon King who created all demons. I clarified that I was not the creator of the rampant demons, explaining that I had only turned one person, Tamayo, and held no interest in creating others. As we discussed leaving that night, I brought up Yoriichi, warning him that neither of us could defeat his brother, and that Yoriichi would surely hunt us down. Initially hesitant about being killed so quickly, Michikatsu became rebellious, declaring he would rather accept death from Yoriichi than endure the artificial competitions of the Demon Slayer Corps. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a Kasugai crow, delivering tragic news. Rengoku Onjuro had died in battle against Upper Moon 6. Though Rengoku fought well, the snake-like demon shed its skin while dying and struck a lethal blow against the exhausted Hashira. The crow invited me to attend the funeral before flying away. Michikatsu was deeply shaken that someone as powerful as Rengoku had fallen so suddenly. Seeing my calm, unbothered expression, he was astonished. I explained that I would not attend, as my presence would only be out of place amidst their mourning. Despite my readiness to leave immediately, Michikatsu gently insisted that I stay at the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters for a few more days before we departed. I stayed at the Demon Slayer Corps for a few days, declining to visit Rengoku's grave. Meanwhile, Michikatsu grew unusually nervous and complex around Yoriichi while quietly preparing to leave the Corps. Lady Ise and the young master respectfully accepted Michikatsu's resignation. As Michikatsu and I walked out into the sunlight, Rengoku's younger brother called out to me. Wearing a crisp black kimono and carrying a Nichiren sword, the 16-year-old boy forced a bright smile, though his trembling lips betrayed his grief. Mentioning that his brother had been buried, he shared that Rengoku had once told him about their fight, noting that his brother would have really liked to see me. When I asked if Rengoku had left any final message for me, the boy paused, his eyes burning with a warm flame. He solemnly told me that if it were his older brother speaking, he would likely say, "Keep moving forward and don't look back." After a brief moment of reflection, I turned away with my umbrella, leaving the Demon Slayer Corps behind alongside Michikatsu. As we traversed the quiet forest, leaving the headquarters, a small green caterpillar crawled onto my shoulder. Picking it up in my palm, Michikatsu chuckled gently, remarking that my fondness for watching insects reminded him of our childhood together. I confessed that I had actually been terrified of bugs, explaining that my memories of hating insects stemmed from my life before transmigrating. Michikatsu gently took the caterpillar from my hand and placed it back in the grass, advising me not to touch things that frightened me. With our departure from the Demon Slayer Corps complete, Michikatsu asked where we were headed next, and I casually suggested we find a place to help him complete his transformation into a demon. Deep in the mountains, Michikatsu and I found an abandoned, dark temple away from the Demon Slayer Corps territory to complete his transformation into a demon. The process lasted 3 painful days. His body convulsed as bones dislocated and veins bulged beneath his skin. Late on the 3rd night, Michikatsu finally awakened, sharp canines protruding from his lips and golden demonic pupils glowing in the dark. Driven by insane hunger, he used his obsessive willpower to suppress his bestial urges and maintain his human consciousness. Once he recovered, I shared my plan to check on Tamayo, a demon I had transformed centuries ago. We set out on our nocturnal journey, but by the 6th night, Michikatsu's face violently flickered between human and demon forms. Trembling with extreme hunger, he finally asked how often demons needed to eat. Realizing I had completely forgotten about his biological needs, I suggested we hunt a group of local mountain bandits. Michikatsu easily wiped out the bandit stronghold, but when he stood over the bloody corpses, I advised him to clean up first. The filthy, unwashed state of the bandits repulsed me. Michikatsu washed in a stream, feeling profound existential doubt, before stripping off the dirtier parts and consuming the meat. His newly awakened taste buds made the human flesh taste delicious, yet the more he ate, the more intense his burning hunger became. After suppressing his appetite and washing his hands in the stream, Michikatsu found me gazing at the moonlight reflecting on the water. Surprised that I hadn't eaten, he asked if I was going to join him. I admitted that I was a picky eater and hadn't found anyone clean or appealing enough to eat, noting that people like him and Yoriichi looked clean but were untouchable. Shocked, Michikatsu realized I had never eaten a human at all, wondering in disbelief how I could endure such agonizing, endless hunger without losing my sanity. When asked how I survived, I casually wondered if eating raw animal meat would work instead, realizing I had never eaten anything whatsoever.